everyone, and welcome to this special session of the Tacoma Park City Council. This is our budget reconciliation night, and we will get started as soon as the clerk calls the roll.
All right. Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Dabala.
Present.
Councilmember Kostick.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Here. Great. I think I'm first going to turn it over to the city manager, and then we'll start our budget reconciliation session.
Thank you very much, and welcome to final budget reconciliation and my final budget reconciliation. I wanted to thank Jessica Clark and the rest of the staff who have worked so hard on the budget. Jessica in particular has been working very, very long hours to provide the information you've requested in order to get you to this decision session this evening. I wanted to note that a number of the questions that you've had are about personnel. And I want to acknowledge the frustration we've had with the difficulty of getting clarification on FTEs and fringes. As always, the blame for any confusion is on me. I apologize to the council and the residents for the confusion. And I particularly apologize to the police department who unfairly took the brunt of the scrutiny. I want to note that our HR division has been working under extremely difficult conditions this past year. Due to the pandemic, they did not have their usual full-time intern, and their working remotely made even more clear the need for the technology improvements that we've been discussing through this budget session. We must move away from manual work and siloed software systems, and I truly feel for our HR staff who've been trying so hard to get us the information that we need in a timely way. As you know from the email sent to the council late this afternoon, we've put on the reconciliation list an additional $138,000 in fringe costs that were accidentally applied in 2 units of the police department. We accidentally applied the much higher pension fringe that goes to sworn officers to a number of civilians. And so that correction has been made and added to the reconciliation list. As you make the final decisions on the tax rate tonight, I ask you to remember that ongoing costs need to be paid with ongoing revenue, and that those trend lines have been widening in recent years. While ARPA funds may help over the next 2 years, FY25 may be very difficult, and we need to keep the long view in mind. Finally, I want to give a particular thank you to the council. Your setting of goals, attention to the budget numbers, and the excellent questions that you ask all made the preparation of the FY22 budget a good collaborative effort. So thank you very much. And Mayor?
Great. Terrific. So tonight, what we're going to do, so what is budget reconciliation? As we know that the process of creating the budget starts much earlier than when we get it presented to us by the city manager. In fact, I would say the staff is probably always working on the budget in one way or another. And in particular, when departments are looking at their specific budgets, when HR is looking at personnel costs, they're crunching numbers in January and February of this year. And just as the city manager said, things change. And under COVID, we've experienced a great deal of change over the last year and a half. So budget reconciliation is our opportunity to look at, have there been changes over the last couple of months since the first budget document was put together that was presented to us by the city manager on April 7th. In addition, this year, the city manager and her proposed budget did have allocated $300,000 for council priorities, which she thought was best decided by the council, because as we know, we had a lot of priorities coming out of our discussions this winter. And so one of the things that we've been doing over the last few weeks is looking at how we can get more specific and put line items in the budget to reflect those priorities. So in order to have this all work out and to be reflected in our final budget document and to decide on the final tax rate, we go through reconciliation. So it is our opportunity to account for things that may be deductions since the first budget document was made. And then in addition to look at how we may allocate more money to different items. So that's what we're doing this evening. We will be taking hand votes on the different line items. We will be going down the chart that the Deputy City Manager is going to share in a moment. But at any time, if somebody wants to go back to something, propose something different, or at the end, I will ask everyone to just reflect on and look, and if adjustments need to be made, we can go back and make them. Our goal, though, tonight is to get all the way through reconciliation because the final budget documents do take time for staff to put together. And once we make decisions tonight, they go back and check and make sure, plug in all the numbers again and make sure it all works out to the tax rate that we decide upon this evening. And then we will be voting on, the budget is a 2-reading ordinance. We vote on the tax rate and the budget, and that will be coming up in the next couple of weeks in May. All right, any overall questions on our process? I will say if folks want to follow along at home and have their own Excel spreadsheet, they can go on the city website to the agenda page and download the Excel spreadsheet as well. So seeing no hands or anything, I'm going to ask the Deputy City Manager to share her screen. Terrific. So just to kind of go over again, what are we looking at here? What we're looking at is really the area in the pinkish shaded areas. Those are the general fund expenditures. Over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that we have different proposed tax rates. The 55-cent rate is what the city manager presented to us in early April. The 53.97 is what the tax rate is at this year. The 52.95 is the current yield. That would be the tax rate if we set it there.
Constant yield.
Constant yield. What did I say? I have no idea.
Constant yield tax rate.
Constant yield tax rate. And that's the one that if we set the tax rate at that level would mean we would get the same revenue that we received last year. And then the final one is the constant yield tax rate plus ECI, which is a measure of inflation on the cost of basically our personnel. So moving down, for example, if we wanted to say, look at the current tax rate of 53.97, we would see that we would need to cut from the overall budget about $265,606. And when we're over here in the pink part, adding and subtracting things, you can see how close we're getting to that, if that is the goal, in the number that is now 119,391. So that will change as we go through tonight. All right, so does everybody understand how the chart works? All right, seeing no hands.
One question, what's the 119,391?
That's what you have to make up. That's what we're basically, if it doesn't make sense right now because we have things double counted and everything, but as we're going through this evening, if you wanted the tax rate to be the same as last year, you would want that to be 0.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Jessica's showing you there. Okay.
Gotcha.
Great. Okay, so we will start at the top. There are a couple of things that I think are probably pretty easy to address right away. The first is a number of decreases that the city manager is suggesting. One is the $300,000 in the priority set aside. And again, as we talked, the city manager did that, but we're allocating it to line items tonight. The second was $250,000 that that was an unidentified housing project that was a carryover from a prior year that we suggested putting on the reconciliation. $58,000 from duplicative capital funding for neighborhood improvements. $19,855 for community legacy loan debt services savings. And as the city manager said, $138,000 for the police fringe that was identified today. So I imagine, if I'm not hearing from anybody, everyone is okay with those amounts being taken out of the budget. Let's see, Councilwoman Searcy.
So, quick question. So the police fringe does not include, and I'm just trying to make sure we're not double counting, the additional pension estimate that's also on the list later, right? So it's just the fringe benefits. It doesn't include the added pension, correct?
That's right. So there's two separate items.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Right. And all of these that I just mentioned, and I'm putting them all together, are like basically adjustments that, given, again, as I said, the budget starts being prepared in January and February, as we've been going through the process the last couple of weeks. These are the adjustments. And then once we're done with these, that's when we get to decision-making time, when we can decide if we want to make that change or not. So, like, for example, the police pension, in years past, we have decided to go above the recommended amount. And this year we could come in just at the recommended amount. Okay. All right. So I'm seeing no hands or anything. So we will assume that everything, those first four decreases, will be in the budget. Can I ask you, the deputy city manager, I think it would be easiest if, so people can keep track, if we, starting at the K-9 unit all the way down, we copy the amounts and put them in the column next to it, and then move things over as we decide.
Oh, okay, sure.
Because then it might be helpful to see how things are. Yeah. So I can keep track. Okay. All right, so then the next on the list, Councilman Searcy had put on prior the elimination of the K-9 unit, which was $10,870. I don't know, Councilman Searcy, if you wanted to speak to this, or, yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to follow the process and raise my hand.
Yeah.
So I see that the chief is on the line. And so one of the things that I've been trying to make sure that I understand is the impact of budget suggestions, not just as it relates to the budget, but as it relates to processes. So it would be helpful if the chief could talk about, and I know the city manager mentioned that this dog is 1 year away from retirement. Is that correct? And also the impact of eliminating the K-9 unit right now versus later. I just want to make sure I understand some of the policy implications that we would need, or policy aspects that we would need to have in place in terms of how the service that the K-9 unit provides. I think it'll be helpful for everyone to understand what those trade-offs are. So if the chief can speak to that a little bit, that would be helpful.
Sure thing. First of all, I do not think it's a good decision at this point without a comprehensive review and discussion to take the funding away from our K-9 unit. We have gone from 3 units to 1 unit since I've been here. There are a lot of different functions of K-9 units. Our current unit is a patrol dog. He can do apprehension, he can do building searches, he can do article searches, drug work, etc. We currently only have 1 patrol dog, as I said earlier, for the entire police department. The dog is utilized only for, when we're talking about apprehension, only for serious criminal offenses that involve violence. We have a much more restrictive policy than other agencies. We also have a review policy as far as when we deploy that dog. They're just in a review process where the handler has to get approval from a supervisor and so on and so forth. Our handler is very cautious about deploying. There was a situation a few months ago where Montgomery County had a stolen vehicle bailout in the city and were requesting us to deploy. Without even going through the process of reviewing it through a supervisor, he already told them that did not conform within our policy. So the concern I have about eliminating our K-9 unit, our one unit, without a comprehensive review is we may still need K-9 in the city of Tacoma Park. And if we do not have our own unit, we are going to rely on the policies and procedures of other departments. So I'll give you an example. If we have a home invasion where someone is shot and someone is running on foot or in a vehicle and we need to utilize a dog and we don't have one, we would have to call on another agency to respond. We do not have command and control over that agency. So the tool, understand that you're giving up an apprehension tool for really serious crimes. We don't utilize K-9 for shoplifters. We don't utilize K-9 for, minor offenses. Like I said, only serious offenses that involve life safety. So even if you were to eliminate our K-9 unit, and then I think you spoke about it earlier, our dog is older in years. Typically, K-9 teams and K-9 dogs service to the police department can come anywhere from 5 to a maximum of 8 years. So the current dog is at the end of its working lifespan. He also has had some medical issues that we had to deal with last year. So most likely the unit we have is going to be phased out within the next year or so anyway, based on lifespan. So in my opinion, it'd be a better idea to allow the process to take place, the discussion of the pros and cons of not having our own unit. And like I say, we've gone from 3 to 1, and then make the decision. And as you can see, the money saved for the fiscal year is not that significant. And understand that we've already put a significant amount of money into purchasing the dog, training the handler, et cetera. So I think the tool is something, if done right and done in a cautious way, is a tool that's really beneficial to the city. So if we were to eliminate our K-9 unit, you have to be cognizant that we still right now could say, well, we have an incident, let's call on Montgomery County, or let's call on Prince George's County, or Metro Transit Police, or Park Police. So if you really are serious about eliminating the use of K-9s in Tacoma Park, just eliminating or not funding our K-9 unit is not going to do that.
Thank you. I see other hands up, so.
Okay.
Councilmember Searcy, if I could just say one more thing about that. One thing is that we don't have policies about how we would use these other agencies, or often it's not even our call if the dogs would come into the city. So just making sure that we would spend the time to have those discussions is important to make sure our policies meet your goals.
Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to Councilmember Searcy for bringing this issue to the table, and also to the chief for the progress that you've made in this area since you've been here. As some of you may remember, this is an issue that has been dear to my heart since early in 2000. And one of the concerns, and the reason I actually supported having 3 dogs is because it made sure that we had a dog to use in Tacoma Park should we need one. As so that we could, as the chief said, follow our own policies and procedures. And not only that, but also we could select the type of dog and handler and the type of education that they get, so that they are trained in work in the way that Tacoma Park wanted them trained. It hasn't been an ideal situation, but it has kept us from some of the problems that we had in the past. I support the chief in this particular matter that's before us tonight. And I look forward to talking about the K-9 unit, the continuation of the K-9 unit as that comes up later, because again, I think it's important that we have the training and the policies and procedures in place that we as a community feel comfortable with. And I can tell you that there are differences between Tacoma Park use of dogs and what we've seen in some other jurisdictions in the past. So I apologize to Councilmember Searcy, but I think I would have to support the chief in this. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, and thank you for the information, Chief. Appreciate it. My initial reaction was that we ought to wait on some of these kinds of decisions to hear from our Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, which may make recommendations in some of these areas, including potentially the canine program. Due to the timing, we're here today and we have to make decisions and then take our votes in a couple of weeks. And that's going to be before the recommendations are in. And so we'll probably get the recommendations before the fiscal year actually starts, but we'll have made most of the budget decisions before that. And so I look forward to those recommendations. And I think some of them will be, may involve some pretty significant discussions about the role of our department and how policing should work in this century. For me, though, in terms of the canine program, I think it does make sense to get rid of it because it's less, from my perspective, about these sort of policy questions and as much about what sort of signal we're sending in terms of how the department operates today. And I can believe that the dog is well trained and that the handler is well trained, but it's beginning to really feel like a vestige of past practices. And I can understand that it may be the case that if we don't have our own program, or at the time, since we only have one dog, it's not on duty 24 hours a day. If there's the possibility of canines coming in from another jurisdiction around here, well, we can develop a policy about that so that it's not just a wide open-ended kind of thing. But to me, this is about sending a signal. I wish we were in a position with the task force to do more, but this strikes me as an initial step that we can say to the community the kinds of priorities that we have. And so I do favor getting rid of the program.
If I can just say one thing, as an African-American male, I know the history of the canine and policing all too well. I have had experiences with being threatened by canine dogs as a child in Prince George's County. Believe you me, I would not keep any tool that I felt was disproportionately a threat to people of color and/or disproportionately a threat to the residents of Tacoma Park. I take my responsibility very seriously in that regard. And I do believe that, the safety of our community is increased by having that ability to apprehend serious violent offenders.
Well, and I'll just say, I don't question your commitment to the principles that you've just laid out. And I don't doubt your personal history in any way. To me, right now, it just goes beyond that to a broader societal question of the signals that we're sending. And so I respectfully find myself on the other side. Thank you.
Councilman Devala.
Yes, thank you, Chief, for sharing your perspective on this. It's been really good to hear it. I have had a lot of residents in Ward 2 request that this service end. And I have one question: how, recognizing that the point really is to not utilize the dog very often, but only when truly necessary. That said, how often is the dog deployed? Once a day, once a week, once a month? What does that look like these days, given the caution with which we want to exercise
Yeah, as I said earlier, the dog can be used in multiple ways.
Mhm.
Searches, for missing person searches. So there are multiple ways that the dog can be used other than criminal apprehension.
Right.
All of our stats are on our webpage as well as our annual report. I don't have them readily available, but like I say, the dog is not just a criminal apprehension tool. It also does a lot of other things, drug scans and so on and so forth. It also does building searches, which is very helpful from an officer safety standpoint of not having to send 6 or 7 officers in to search a building. When you send a canine team in, it can multiply that and clear a building much quicker and much more safely.
Thank you.
Councilman Costick.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Chief, for sharing your perspective on this and the caution that you have taken with the K9 unit. I appreciate that very much. I do support at this time removing the unit. I do think you're raising some important points about the steps that will need to be taken very quickly if we do that to make sure that we have a policy in place for how we will move forward and making sure that we're very, very thoughtful about what we can do with other jurisdictional K9 units and when we may need that and when we what we can put in place to kind of make sure that that is more in line with what we want it to be. But I do appreciate those the work you've been doing on this so far and the you flagging that for us to really think about closely.
Yeah, Councilmember Smith.
Chief, if the council goes ahead and removes the funding for the K9 unit, and we have to rely on other jurisdictions or other police departments, how do we define what is acceptable use for a K9 unit? And what happens if that jurisdiction, that police department does not actually live up to the orders that you have put in place for using a K9 unit? Do we have any recourse, or do we just, send out a statement and say, well, if you guys do use a K9 unit in Tacoma Park, we would like you to do it this way?
Well, let me just say there are 2 different ways in which a K9 could be requested or utilized in Tacoma Park. We could request it as an agency through mutual aid. So in other words, it would have to meet the criteria of our current policy as far as deployment, and then we would request another area K9 to respond. But we don't have control over what training they get and so on and so forth. So that's one way that it could be done. Another agency could respond. There could be a bailout from a stolen vehicle, and they could bring their own K9 in from another jurisdiction to operate here in the city. That's the same with our ERT as well. So, I mean, basically, what from our perspective, from the department perspective, we still would have the same policies regarding mutual aid request. So we would only make that mutual aid request under certain circumstances. But a lot of these situations are fluid. Sometimes the request does not come from the agency. You have a K9 officer that just shows up on a scene and self-deploys, if I could be candid, sometimes not per our request. When significant incidents happen, multiple officers from multiple jurisdictions respond. So in that particular case, we may not be able to dictate if a particular K9 from another agency deploys. I value having command and control over police operations in the city of Tacoma Park. That's what I'm ultimately responsible for. And I do not like putting that in someone else's hands where we don't know what the policies and procedures are. But to answer your question, it could be done. Our policies and procedures for internal requests to other agencies would still be intact. But as I said earlier, even today, we could have another agency, have an incident that traverses over into Tacoma Park, and then they call out their own K9. We just wouldn't utilize our own.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Searcy.
Thanks. So this is, for me, I'm torn because, you know, my grandma always says, do things in decency and in order. And although I want to see the K-9 unit disbanded, I want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is in decency and in order. We can do it in a way in which we know we've already worked out the necessary arrangements with neighboring jurisdictions and kind of make sure that dogs that are coming into our city, in the few cases where we need them, are operating in a stance that is similar to what we embody here in the city. So one question I have is, how long, like those types of agreements typically, how long would that take to do? And I'm again, I hate to be going into implementation, but if it means we're going to need about, 8 months to get all of that stuff in place, then do we keep funding our K-9 for a portion of the year while we're working those things through, and then make those decisions? And that's the piece that I'm struggling mentally to think through, because what I value is not just getting rid of the K-9 unit, but making sure that we're not opening the floodgates for other jurisdictions to come into our city with dogs, and they're not operating in the way in which we would want K-9s to be used in the city. If that makes sense. So I'm trying to work through timing of how much time would we need to make sure that we can put the necessary infrastructure in place should we get rid of the K-9 unit.
That's a good question. And let me state once again, our current team is at the end of, kind of their workability, our lifespan for patrol service. So yeah, that's going to happen ultimately sooner than later anyway. But that's a complicated question about policies and procedures, because we have a memorandum of understanding with Montgomery County, with mutual aid, with Park Police, but we don't have one with Metro Transit Police. We don't have one with the Prince George's County Police. We don't have one with the Hyattsville City Police. So these canine dogs can come from pretty much any jurisdiction. So it really is going to have to be really well thought out about what we do. So if we decide in the city of Tacoma Park that we do not want to use patrol dogs, and I say patrol dogs because there are other dogs, there's search and rescue dogs, there are comfort dogs, there are multiple other uses of canine that we haven't even discussed, that I from in the literature I've seen. I don't think the community is demanding that we do not utilize dogs for search and rescue and so on and so forth. They just don't want them used in criminal apprehension. But all of this is going to have to be really thought out, because it's not going to be solved by an MOU or an agreement with one particular agency, because on Thursday night, it might be Greenbelt. On Wednesday night, it might be Montgomery County. It just depends on who's available at the given time to respond when we put that request in. So I think we really need to think this one through. So if let's just say, the task force recommends that we end our program, and the council decides that that's in the best interest of the city, we still need to think about how we're going to go through putting in policies and procedures to ensure that what we're trying to avoid ultimately, and that's someone being accidentally bit or something like that happening, does not happen. But right now, it's kind of the cart before the horse, and we really haven't thought this one through. So I think that an opportunity to have a very educated discussion about the pros and cons of K-9, the different applications of K-9, the policies that would need to be implemented to ensure that if we don't have a program, no one else comes in our city and decides to, deploy a dog in a way that we don't want it to be done. So there's a lot of moving parts. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's not as easy as just an MOU or an agreement with one agency.
Councilmember Searcy, one point is that this amount of money is not a large amount of money. So it could be changed. It could be dealt with as a budget amendment at a later time. If this were a large amount of money that made a big difference about the tax rate, you may need to absolutely make that decision tonight, but this may be something that you could do as a budget amendment at a later time.
Yeah, I was actually I was wondering, and thank you, Councilwoman Searcy. I think I can't remember the words you said, your grandmother lived decency and, well, I forgot the second D.
Yeah, decency and in order.
A
It's
decency and in order. Oh, decency and in order. I've said over the past year or so that I do favor us moving away from canine, but I do want to do it in order. And so, as the city manager said, this isn't a large sum of money, but I also don't want to just leave it there. So I know we were, this evening, I don't think is necessarily the appropriate time to go into all this debate, to be prepared for it this evening. And I would suggest maybe this is something that, given that the task force is looking at these things, that we have sort of on a hold to make sure that we come back to in the next, month or so before July 1st, just to have the chief have a bit more time, have our task force look at this so that we can plan a little bit more and have a deeper conversation on this topic than we are able to this evening. So I don't know if that is sort of a, at least it puts it in a place where we are deliberately saying we're coming back to it, and in a way that we have more time to delve into it and see if the task force is able in the next month or so to provide a recommendation. I see Councilmember Siemens and Kovar have their hands up. And then Dabala.
Yes, sorry to jump in again, but I feel very strongly about this subject, and I have to admit that that it scares me. Back at the turn of the century, which was a while ago, I admit, but I don't know that things have changed that much. We had a serious incidents right here in Tacoma Park where dogs were put into a person's residence. The dog went and chomped down on the lady's face while she was asleep in her own bed in her own residence. And it was done by a dog that was very aggressive because it was trained to be aggressive. There are different ways of training dogs. There's, bite and tear apart, or bite and hold, or grab and hold. There's different training that goes on. And that was why I felt it was important at that time that we have our own dogs doing this. And the other thing is, people look and they talk about in recent, over the recent weeks about the police. And all police in all jurisdictions don't get trained the same way and don't have the same values and standards. And thankfully, under Chief Duvall's leadership, we are gradually changing the culture and the values within our police department. And that's a key piece of this, because when a dog comes in from another jurisdiction, it has its training on how aggressive it's to be and how it's to handle situations. But the handlers also can come from a different culture than what we in Tacoma Park would admire and want. And again, I don't think it's something we should be doing rapidly. I think it's something that thankfully Chief Duvall has been gradually changing things with the K9 unit over the past couple of years. We've had some problems here even in Tacoma Park, but I think things are moving in the right direction, getting better. And if the council and the chief decide after reviewing this, scrutinizing it very closely and making the informed decisions, decides to do away with the K9 unit, I will support it. But I'm not comfortable doing that at this point in time. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think that goes, I don't, I see a couple of hands up and I do think tonight we do have this is our first, really our first item on the budget reconciliation list. And again, I think this does need a broader conversation. And so I'll just say, Councilmember Kovar and Dabala, I know you've spoken to this already, if you want to say a few more words, but.
I'm saying a few more words. I just want to point out one thing. I understand that a majority of the council appears to want to retain it for now. We have one unit, which means at most a quarter to a fifth of a time in a given week, it would be available. And so if we're concerned about other agencies coming in, that's could happen at any moment, all the time, a majority of the time. So this doesn't change that in a direct way in terms of day-to-day what could happen. That could happen at any time because at most this particular unit can only be on duty a limited amount of time. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, the dog is available on call. So if it's a situation, we can call him out at any time.
Right, but it's literally not able to be used every single moment, and there's nothing to stop another jurisdiction from coming in. You just said that, and so that I think that this doesn't eliminate that danger, is what I would say.
Okay. Councilman Dabala? We can't hear you. You're on.
Sorry about that. While we were talking, I had looked up the numbers from the last couple of years per the chief's suggestion, but if the sense of the group is to put this on hold pending in the beginning of June, a recommendation from the task force, and we deal with this in June, not 6 months from now, I would be okay with waiting. I really would prefer to make it one of the first things that we focus on when we get the task force recommendations. And if anybody wants me to read the list of canine activities dramatically allowed, I'm happy to do so, but we can wait on that one.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Well, we have it on the reconciliation to take out the canine unit. I guess we can. It's on the table, so we should probably take a vote on that, and we'll see where that goes. Council.
I'm sorry. I thought you just said that we were.
I offered a suggestion, and I'm not getting. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm horrible with the process.
Okay.
I have to do something to.
Well, yeah. So it's on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was agreeing with the whole.
Okay. So, all right. So yes, Councilman Searcy, thank you. So since it's on, since you proposed to put on the reconciliation list, if you now would like to put it on a hold until we hear from the task force, we can do that. I just want to make sure we had clear direction on that for everybody.
Okay.
So we can do that.
Yeah. To do.
Yes. Okay. So Councilman Searcy is saying that instead of recommending this as taking out of the budget at the moment, the canine, that is put on hold so that we can have the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force provide some input, have the chief come back, have other folks come back and weigh in. I see Councilman Kostick has her hand up.
I guess I'm just confused about what a hold would mean, since it's an existing thing that I don't feel like it's the same as putting something on hold that's like street resurfacing where we're not doing it on a regular basis. So come July 1, if it's on hold, what happens then? I mean, I personally would favor removing it from the budget, but if there is, it doesn't sound like there's overall support for that. So I'm trying to understand what the hold means.
I guess what I was thinking is that you're right, it's not the same as like what we did last year, but it tells the police department and the police chief that this is something council, before we go ahead, assuming July 1, that the K-9 unit is moving forward, that the council wants to revisit it.
Mayor, if you wish, you could have it as a whereas kind of clause in the budget.
Yeah, we have it in the budget resolution. Yeah.
Because so you could leave it in the budget as it is, but have it as some text format.
Great.
That's what I was going to suggest, that I would be happy to work with Councilmember Cersei if she wants to work on a line for the resolution, being a little more specific about what this means.
Right.
I would be happy to do that.
Great. So any objections to that? All right, seeing none then,
Well, I disagree, but
well, you can move, council members, sorry, Kohar, this is more confusing than reconciliation generally is. You could, instead of Councilwoman Searcy, you could put it on the table to remove it from the budget and we can have a vote on it if you'd like.
I don't think we need to do that, 'cause I can see how everybody is. I'm just saying I don't.
I have
we
no
don't have to
idea.
do agree yet.
So,
I'll go ahead and do that. I move that it remain on the reconciliation list and we take a vote.
okay. So it is on the reconciliation list to remove the K-9 unit for the upcoming fiscal year. Given how confusing the last 20 minutes have been, I'm going to ask the clerk to actually call a verbal vote on this one on supporting removal of the K-9 unit from the budget.
Okay, Councilmember Kovar.
Supporting removal.
Okay, Councilmember Dvala,
Same.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Nay.
Councilmember Smith,
No.
Councilmember Searcy. Councilmember Searcy.
No, we need the time.
Mayor Stewart.
No, I want to wait until we hear back from the task force. But I want to be on the record to say I actually do not support us having a K-9 in the city, but I want to do it in the appropriate way. As I have said for the last year, that we have the public safety task force look at this, that the chief prepare policies for us, and that we do it in the appropriate order. But I do not support us having a K-9 unit moving forward and want to move away from it. But I want to do it in the appropriate way. So, all right. So that stays in. The next line item is the police pension. This isn't a reduction. This is keeping at the what has been recommended that we put in the police pension. But when the budget was being prepared, I think someone may have rounded up. And so if we are to keep it at the same level, it would be, we could deduct $50,490 from the budget as proposed. And I think a couple of people, Councilman Searcy and Costick, had put this on the list, as a number of other people. And I don't know, Councilman Searcy, if you want to talk about this one and then the next line item, which wouldn't be an addition of $50,000 for the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force.
Yes. I am in favor of not making the additional police pension contribution, and in exchange reallocating those funds to help with funding some of the initial implementation of some of the initial recommendations that we may get from the Public Safety Task Force. Keeping in mind that they're looking at things that go beyond policing. And although much of it may be addressed through ARPA funds, there still may be a number of things that will not be. So having these funds available to really be able to implement some of the changes would be very helpful.
Great. Sorry, I'm looking for Councilman Dvala.
Old hand.
Oh, okay. Anyone have any comments on this one or discussion? All right. Seeing Councilman DeBala.
Sorry, new hand. Do we have anything from the task force suggesting what the 50,000 might be used for and whether their recommendations, we have not yet an idea of the budget implications of their recommendations? Is that right?
That's right. Although we do know from the subcommittees and the purposes of those subcommittees, some areas that they're looking into,
Uh-huh.
crisis units, they're looking at training programs that the officers are undergoing. Also looking at things like education and community outreach and how some of that works. So they're looking at a lot of different aspects of public safety. So again, having a few funds in the pocket might be nice, because they may make recommendations that, again, may relate to community outreach, web alerts and things like that. That might be helpful.
So it might speed up a couple of the recommendations because the funds are available, but it's essentially a placeholder.
It's a placeholder. Yeah, it's so that funds would be available. And also, there's a real possibility that there may be pilots and things that folks might want to try. And again, there may be funds that are made available through ARPA.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee that, depending on the nature of the recommendation that the task force makes, that it may meet the requirements of ARPA. So really make sure and shows the task force that we're investing now in the recommendations that they plan to come up with.
Councilmember Searcy, if I might just ask, if for some reason the task force wanted to extend a little bit longer, there would also need to be funds for the consultants. Is this something that you would?
I'm sorry, you're going in and out a little bit.
Yeah.
Struggling.
I'm sorry. Would you consider these funds for the consultants if there was an interest in extending a little bit longer the task force?
Yes, we would just need them again, it's for implementation of recommendations. So if the
I
recommendation,
get it.
we need more time, we need more support. Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. I had too many windows open. All right, Councilmember Siemens and then Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. I know that a lot of people are focused on the police and some of the horrible things that have gone on in some jurisdictions. But I think this is a citywide financial issue that we should be paying attention to and continue to fund the police pension as planned. And I don't see the benefit to doing this other than maybe grabbing some money that we could use for other recommendations with the Public Safety Task Force or things that the council decides that we want to do. And I don't think it's a wise area to be taking money away from. It's a financial obligation that we have and that we're trying to pay off.
Councilmember Kovar.
Couple of comments. First off, just with regard to the financial obligation, my understanding is that, and a little bit more higher, was over and above the amount recommended by our independent actuary. So what the first part of what Councilmember Searcy is talking about doing, which would be to reduce that $50,000 or so contribution to the pension, is just to bring it in line with what our independent actuary proposed, which is in the past, I think generally what we've tried to do is have our contribution each year be equal to that. So I do support that. I guess and this is a procedural question, so maybe the mayor can respond. We're treating the cut of that and the other 50,000 is one?
No, it was just, no, when Councilwoman Searcy had been talking about it, she had been talking, I just wanted to give her the opportunity to
Okay,
talk
that's-
about. We'll vote on each differently.
Okay,
So
great.
you could retain, you could say you want to retain the 50,490 in the pension to go above what is the recommended amount, which some years we have done. But we'll take two separate votes.
Okay, well,
Sorry,
so-
I didn't mean to confuse things.
Okay, so I do favor making that $50,000 reduction to bring it back down to the recommended amount. As for the 50,000 for the task force, I have mixed feelings about that. I had suggested when we discussed this in a previous session, the idea of potentially putting some of the police budget on hold, and I think there wasn't a lot of support for that. I guess I'm a little bit uncertain of what the 50,000 would represent. We really don't know what they may recommend and whether there will be cost to the things that they recommend, right? So do we have an idea for what they would recommend, and how would we know that at this point? And I don't know who can answer that. Maybe Councilmember Searcy can answer that.
And I'm happy to, we can do a little additional follow-up with the consultants around where they are, but I will say, of course, they're looking into cross-jurisdictional issues. I mean, they're looking at a lot of things, cross-jurisdictional issues. They're looking at things like how we're looking at contacting the police department, like 911 versus our long number that people need to, the non-emergency number that people need to commit to memory. They're looking at housing and its connection to public safety and homelessness and things that we can do there. They're of course looking at mental health. They're looking at policies, use of force policies. They're looking at a lot of things. They're looking at structure. They're looking at a lot of things. So it's, I can't, because there's 3 different groups that's going on and they're all covering different things. It's really hard for me right now to say definitively what their recommendations will be. But I do know that there will be recommendations. And so what we have to ask ourselves is, are we invested in this process enough to be able to say, ideally, yes, we said, lots of people have said, we wish we had the recommendations now and we would take budget actions based on what those recommendations are. What I'm saying is we don't have the recommendations just yet, but are you still willing to make some budget actions based on the expectation of implementing those recommendations? And if so, how do we make sure that we have that place in the budget to do that? Otherwise, we would get the recommendations and we would have to figure out what we could use to fund the recommendations. ARPA may work out for a lot of it. It might not, and we wouldn't have any pre-identified monies to pull from.
Councilman Costick.
I just wanted to say I support both the reduction in the police pension and the additional 50,000 for the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force implementation. I don't think we're going to have any lack of need for funds for implementing changes that could be pretty big in terms of how we're thinking about making shifts and the things that we're doing. Whenever you change something, it takes money to make those changes. And so I think putting some funds with the expectation that we are going to need some funds to really be able to implement what they come back to us with, to me, makes a lot of sense. So I'd like to see us do that.
Great. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I hate to sound cranky tonight. I think there seems to be a misperception on someone's part that somehow the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force is making decisions on budget changes and on policies for the police department. And that's not at all what their function is to make recommendations. I did not abdicate my responsibility to make decisions or to participate in the making of decisions that the council is going to make. And I find it somewhat offensive that people keep saying that, well, we need this money to implement the recommendations of the Public Safety Task Force, like there's a step in there that we don't need to do, which is the council review those recommendations or bring forward other changes that we think would be beneficial to the community. And this seems to be throughout the entire discussion. It's been, we have to have money to implement the task force recommendations, or we have to do this because the task force is going to say it. It's not the way it works at all, not the way it should work. But I certainly do support with kind of a different wording on that. I do support the addition of the $50,000 for making improvements, policy improvements for our police department. Thank you.
Councilman Searcy.
I hear you, Councilmember Siemens, and I would like to describe what we're about today. It is to allow $50,000 for the council to identify priority recommendations that it would like to implement that come from the Public Safety Task Force.
Aye.
Thank you. And I just, I want to add my voice to say I support taking out the additional $50,000 on the police pension and including funds to do exactly what Councilman Searcy said, to make sure I get it right. And I do think these funds will be used. I know the police chief has already been looking into pilot projects, looking at having counselors and helping with mental health services in our community. We hope we can do some stuff with the county and other things, but there's a lot of things in the works right now, moving with the ARPA funds and other things. And I think making sure that we have funding that is available to us so that we can implement some recommendations that may come out of the task force or come out of our police department or come out of some of the work folks are doing at the county level. It'll be really important. We have a very tight budget this year. And so I think having some flexibility to make sure we can put in place some of the changes many of us want to see, I think is going to be important. So thank you, Councilwoman Searcy, for putting that on the reconciliation list. Okay, so I think the way I'm going to do this is we're looking at the reduction in the police pension of $50,490. I guess it's easiest just since everybody can't see everybody else, if the clerk could just call the vote on that to see if people want to reduce the police pension by that amount.
Sure. Councilmember Kovar.
Reduce it.
Okay, Councilmember Dabala.
Agreed.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
I'll stop being cranky. Okay, go ahead.
Councilmember Smith.
I agree to reduce.
Councilmember Searcy. Thank you. Thank you.
Aye.
And Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, the next was to add to the budget $50,000 to provide funding for the potential implementation of recommendations from the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. Any objections to adding the $50,000? Hearing no objections, we will add the $50,000. All right, next, a number of folks had talked about flooding and stormwater engineering on private property. At the moment, we had a placeholder for $200,000, but I know folks have been talking about potentially different amounts to recommend for this evening that go in the budget. And I believe our Public Works Director, Ms. Braithwaite, is with us, and we just wanted to give her a moment to speak to this.
Oh, good evening. Because this is a new program that we haven't established before, it's hard to say with any certainty what amount of funding will be helpful. I think the main point that I have in regard to this is I think we can all be assured that this will be an ongoing expense. It won't be a one-year type of expense. It'll be something that we will, once started, we will see going into the foreseeable future. In those future years, we may have a bit better understanding about our capacity for reviewing issues. I think we can also assume that this will require an engineering team support. So we'll be using consultants to help us both identify problem issues as well as review issues that residents bring to our attention. And then dealing with the design and development of solutions for those issues will most definitely require engineering consultant support. So I think any amount of money gets us started. However, knowing the cost of engineering consulting and knowing just recently the number of people who are interested and starting to organize in their neighborhoods to bring issues to the forefront, I think it's safe to assume that we will need a substantial amount of funding in order to make any headway or get the program started in a credible way. So that being said, you know, whether it's 150, whether it's 250, I think that's the ballpark in which a program like this would need to have a level of funding for. So, I mean, I'm certainly comfortable with the amount that's presented. It could go potentially lower, you know. Again, this is all hypothetical. And because we don't yet have the program rollout and going, it's hard to know how much more we could spend and what the need is. But I think that the issue is that it'll take us a while to get ramped up, and we'll have to develop the policies and the format for which we create the program. That'll have some, you know, we can certainly start working on that now, but that will take some time and find the right partner that can be most efficient and effective working on this issue with us. So that said, all I can say is I do think it'll take a substantial amount of money. It'll be a long-term expense. And I think the amount of funding you've got put in that now is sufficient, and it could probably go a bit lower. 150 to 250 would be the recommendation that I would have.
Great. Thank you so much. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you for that information. I appreciate the Public Works Director's comments. This is a concept that I've been urging us to begin to take action on for a while. And in my mind in particular, with the adoption of the new stormwater fee structure, I thought it was especially important that we start taking action to begin to address the challenge posed by what I think all experts seem to believe will be an increase in intensity of rainstorms, if not total amount of rainfall, and the associated stormwater flow. And what we've seen in recent years around some of these storms has been a level of flow between and among and across private property, unlike what we've seen in the past. And so what I kind of envisioned was that we have an initial amount of funds, and this could be it. I could live with 150,000 instead of 200,000. What I imagined was we pay a consultant to do an initial study, maybe to identify some number, a dozen key areas in the city that affect either the widest number of private property areas or the biggest geographical area, identify all of those and maybe even come up with some solutions. And then we hope there will be funding in ARPA for stormwater. It says water. I think stormwater is water, so I hope that will count. But that would then be where potentially larger amounts of money would be available for some actual projects and work that could be completed in the requisite 3.5 years or so. Whether and to what extent and how much we would go beyond the end of 2024 and keep on doing these things. For all we know, a consultant might say, hey, if you fix these 7 spots in the city and those could all be funded at ARPA, we're in pretty good shape. I don't know the answer to that. But to me, the first step is to have some outside party do some analysis to help us figure this out with input from people in the community, residents and business owners who have particular examples that they would point to, and then we can go from there. Now, I was tempted to say, let's roll the dice and just wait for ARPA and hope we get it, but I decided in the end that, I'm nervous about doing that. So I think including that amount, and again, I think 150,000 will be okay in the actual budget now, and then we use that as the stepping stone to then see what we can do in ARPA and beyond. That's how I imagine these funds being used. Thank you.
You, Councilman DeBala.
I was going to say something similar, that I envisioned the first step to be a system-wide or a citywide look at where the worst issues are and what the options are for dealing with that, whether it's technical assistance to a group of residents, whether it's, who knows what it is. But the first step being to take that overall look, and that would be what I would see this amount of money being used for. I think 150 or even 125,000 would be enough to get started. As far as but I do think it's very much a priority, and with or without the ARPA funds, I think we need to take the first step. I think the first step is doable within a budget of 125,000 to 150,000. That said, I've been following, as has the city manager and deputy manager, have been following the Treasury guidance process pretty closely to see whether water includes stormwater. And I'm told that the guidance is pretty close to ready and might even be available this week. So I'm not sure we have to wait too much longer to find out. But I would like to, how could I propose to make this 150 instead of 200?
And why don't we just go through, because now I've heard two people say 150. If other people would feel that way and we get to 4, then we can make it 150 and we'll vote on it that way. And if somebody feels strongly they want to vote on 200, then we can take a vote on 200 too. So.
And one reason I feel that way is because we still do have a number of other things coming after this on the list, and a limited amount of money to use to address these issues.
Okay, great. Councilman Searcy.
Thanks. So you have 3 now that's in support of lowering the amount to, 150, 125, wherever we land. I do think that this is something important for us to really start to explore, and making sure that we're getting the process right, I think will be critical. But I am, of the mindset that there's a number of other big ticket things that are happening. We have the new rollout in terms of the stormwater fee that's going to be happening. We're going to still have quite a few stormwater projects. I'm ready for 13th and Hillwood Manor Playground work could be done. So I do think it's important that while this is a council priority, for us to really think realistically about capacity and how far we would be able to get within this particular fiscal year. So that's why I'm open to lowering the amount, because I think it's going to take time for us to ramp up. And I also think that capacity, at least through the fall, is going to be a challenge given current staff workload. So thank you.
Great. Councilmember Siemens.
I would just say that given the magnitude of this issue across the city and within Ward 4, I support the 200,000.
Great. All right. And I want to say Councilman Kostick, did you have your hand up? Sorry, I started go up and then down.
No, I know. I was waiting back and forth whether I take the time to chime in or just vote. I support this. This is a serious issue in the city as a whole. And I know a lot of residents in Ward 3 are dealing with issues with stormwater. I would love to dedicate the full 200 in the interest of trying to maintain a tax rate that is at the rate of last year's. I think it makes sense to have it be somewhat under that. I think 150 would get us started in a positive way towards this work and help us understand more of what the next steps would be. So I would support 150.
Okay, great. Councilmember Smith.
Would like to say I support the full 200. This is a big issue for residents in Ward 5. I recently went with the Director of Public Works to visit a number of homes whose basements are flooding, and it's going to take a lot of money to fix this issue. So yeah, it's not going to be ramped up immediately, but the more money that we can start off with this program, the better.
Thank you. And I'm just going to say I'm very glad this is on our reconciliation list this evening. I think this is probably the thing, and one of the things Ms. Braithwaite spends most of her time, I would imagine, in the evenings, meeting with residents. It is a real issue. I know it is one that, in fact, we've been actually talking about for a number of years. I think having a line item of either 150 or 200,000 is really important because I think, as Ms. Braithwaite said, this is going to be an ongoing expense for us. I think we're going to see this as part of our budgets moving forward. With ARPA, hopefully we have an opportunity to infuse this program with more than that amount for the first year. But I think having a line item of at least 150,000 and getting it in our budget is going to be important for next year and for years to come. So I'm supportive of that. So, okay, why don't we do this? Why don't I ask the clerk to call the vote, and when she calls, it sounds like everyone's supportive of putting money into this flooding and stormwater engineering on private property. And so when the clerk calls your name, just please tell me if you would like 150 or 200,000 added to the reconciliation list.
And could I just ask one question before we do that? So is it understood that potentially within this, it could involve going to a consultant as opposed to just throwing this amount at the problem? I mean, does that need to be specified, or?
Councilmember Kovar,
Yeah.
we would need to use consultants to identify the area.
I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
I'm sorry. We would need to use consultants
Okay.
to identify the area.
Okay. So this is not, we're giving 150,000 or 200,000 to start
the way-
projects. This is paying someone to do this analysis.
Yeah, and I will, Ms. Braithwaite can correct me if I'm wrong. This is also not, money that we're giving to individual homeowners to address, say, a flooding issue in their basement, but this is to help groups of homeowners in areas of our city where there is need of assistance in terms of figuring out exactly where an issue is and what is the best way to tackle that issue. Ms. Braithwaite, did I get that?
It's been my understanding that this was for program identification, problem area identification, and design development. It was my assumption that it does not include funding for construction. So that will be an item that will have to be figured out whether or not the city participates in funding construction, or whether the property owners would be responsible for the cost of construction through some kind of favorable loan or other types of green bank type funding. That's my understanding. If the council sees differently, then we're talking about a sea change in terms of amount of money.
Mhm. Councilman Damala? You're on mute.
I was going to say my goals are even slightly more modest, which is to identify the problems in the areas and identify how we would even start to tackle design development. First, I would just be happy to know which areas meet that set of criteria, where's a place where a group of folks together can make a difference rather than trying to, because we can't afford to fix everybody's individual basement. But where can we work together to manage the flow of water in the private space? So again, my goal would even be one of those things, not even two of them, for a first blush, having been wanting to make progress on this issue for many years. So thank you.
Great. All right, so the clerk's going to call your name, say whether or not you would like to allocate 150,000 or 200,000.
Okay, Councilmember Kovar,
150.
Councilmember DeBala,
150.
Councilmember Costick,
150.
Councilmember Siemens,
200.
Councilmember Smith,
200.
Councilmember Searcy.
150.
All right, Mayor Stewart.
Doesn't really matter, but 150,
That
I
doesn't,
guess. Okay, so that's 150 there. Our next item is I will turn it over to Councilman Costick, who has added to our reconciliation list money for plaques and a sign, a plaque at the Hefner Community Center and a new park sign at Jackson Boyd, with the understanding we change the name. We're not just replacing the sign that's there.
Yeah, thank you. So these funds are funds I added in. These were funds that were in the proposed budget, I believe it was last year, to move forward on the work that we began when we were discussing changing the street names of the Civil War generals and taking some action to commemorate and acknowledge the wrongs related to the work back in, I believe it was the 50s. I might be incorrect about the timeline on that, around the construction of the Public Works facility and the Hefner Community Center in the Black community in Tacoma Park, where we wanted to kind of commemorate some of the things that had happened there in terms of the actions the city had taken and the historic neighborhood as well. And then we've also talked about changing the name of the Jackson Boyd Park, since that is a city park that we do have jurisdiction over in terms of a name change. And so I put in these funds to help us move that work forward. In thinking about it a little more, I was thinking, maybe a plaque is the appropriate thing for us to do at Hefner Community Center. Maybe there's something else that may be more appropriate or more meaningful. And I'd like us to investigate that as well. But these funds would be utilized to be able to take the next step on what we discussed then. And I would also, I would like to see us go ahead and change the street names, but that's a different discussion. And it's my understanding that that would not require funds in the budget because those would just be a street name replacement. So these funds would be for a plaque or other action at the Hefner Center and a sign change at Jackson Boyd Park.
Councilman DeBala. Okay. Anyone else?
I do just have a quick question. Yeah. I know there were some questions going around about this, and I wanted to make sure I understood fully that would the funds for any of this, particularly the park sign, be eligible for the facilities maintenance reserve?
We don't think so.
Okay. Councilmember Kovar, DeBala, and then Siemens.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I think we had talked about having plaques at or at least a plaque at the Civil War general streets as well. And so I'm not sure I perceive the clear distinction between these, which seem meritorious, and the Civil War ones. And I wonder whether there's a whole group of signs and plaques that we should move forward, and they could potentially fall under one of the later ones that we're going to be discussing on racial equity and community engagement work. So I don't object per se to these two in any way. And I think the Hefner one in particular seems really important, but I'm not sure why they're singled out when there are several others that we've also been working on that I think also fit within this. And if they could be dealt with as in a group out of that separate funding later, I think that could make sense. Thanks.
And I'll just note, I'm fine with this money being sort of a bucket that we use to address the streets and or Hefner and or Jackson Boyd, kind of us making that decision at a later date, but utilizing these funds and setting them aside for that. My thinking in terms of proposing this was ideally I would like us to change those street names so that we didn't necessarily have a plaque, but perhaps we have a full street name change and to consider that. It might involve a plaque, and that might be the most appropriate thing to do there, but to have some pot of funds that we use for that purpose.
I'd like to, remind us that we did take this up as a council, and as someone who also believed as Councilman Costick did, and I did put forward a plan and wanted to change the names. It was voted down by the council as a direction. And so the current policy that of the council is that we were not going to change the names of the streets, though since then the county has started looking at this and looking at some of the street names. So it is a possibility. However, if we are as a council, I believe, to change what we had decided prior to this, I think we would probably have to actually take another vote, because the vote that was taken on this, a majority of the council did not want to change the street names at that time. So I just want to remind us of that. That is something that we worked with. The Commemoration Commission had a number of work sessions on, and the council did vote to not change the street names. So I just want to remind everybody of that. So with the money we're looking at now, and we can revisit that if we want to increase the pot and say we're going to revisit that. But I just want to make sure that we're not changing a policy tonight that the council had already set through a vote. Anyway, Councilman Costick, I didn't want to cut you off, but I just
just to that point, I'm not proposing funds be in this bucket for changing those street names for that reason, because I don't think we have discussed that. And that's why I specifically noted the plaque and the park sign. But to your point, Councilmember Kovar, I'm just saying I would be open to that being sort of a general pot that is utilized for plaques, plural potentially, and other changes related to name changes and recognizing what happened around the Hefner Center.
Councilman Damala.
Thank you. I thought I knew what this was. Now I'm confused. So why I put my hand up was a couple days ago was $5,000. Now it's $10,000. And I just want to make sure, I thought that we had agreed that the Jackson Boyd Park name and Hefner, the sign at Hefner, were going to change, and that the money was to do that. And it had been in last year, and because of COVID needing, a lot of things didn't get done. So is that what is proposed here, or is it something more than that? And what's the thinking behind the sudden doubling?
Yes, that
This is not necessarily all for Councilmember Costick.
Yes, that is the thinking, Councilmember Dabala.
Thank you.
The doubling, is, I believe, and City Manager Ludlow can explain that further. That's, I think, what staff found when they were looking into actual cost.
Yeah, I think the city manager's having some issues with her Wi-Fi. So she texted me and she said her Wi-Fi is internet's a little shaky tonight. And so when Councilman Costick put this on the reconciliation list last week, the staff did go back to look at more carefully what the costs would be for the plaques. And what they looked at is that the Hefner sign alone could be over $5,000. And so that's what they're recommending. If we want to say this is for the Jackson Boyd Park sign and the plaque at Hefner Community Center, the estimate is for $10,000.
And my last question is, and who would this be a staff function to get this done and put this in?
Yes, I mean, it would be a direction to staff.
Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Siemens, we can't hear you. There you go.
I lost my unmute button.
Mhm.
All right. I just wanted to thank Councilman Kostick for putting this item on the reconciliation list, and I do support it. Thank you. As written on here.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Searcy.
I just want to echo Councilmember Siemens' point. Thank you, Councilmember Costick, for putting this on the reconciliation list. I support it. I do just want to say that, I support the street renaming, but if I remember correctly, one of the reasons or the challenges at the time was the complexity in terms of U.S. Postal Service as well as the county in terms of trying to make those changes. So if the county is making progress, again, we're, not for another night, but if he is making progress on ways in which we could more easily make some of those changes, I would welcome that discussion after we get through the budget.
Great. Thank you. Sorry, and I'm just trying to keep us focused. And I just want to say thank you to Councilman Costick. I had forgotten that because of COVID, we had taken it out of the budget last year and had not realized that it was not in the budget this year. So I appreciate her identifying that and adding it to the budget. And I look forward to particularly thinking of both of the projects, but really thinking about how we can have a community process around renaming Jackson Boyd Park and what that will look like. So looking forward to that. Cool. All right. Does anyone object to moving, putting $10,000 on the reconciliation list for a plaque at Hefner Community Center and a new sign at Jackson Boyd Park? Oh, Councilmember Smith?
I don't support it.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, then seeing is the vote was 6-1, we'll move the $10,000 over. All right, next item is the tree canopy pilot. This is something we had talked about last year when doing the ordinance on the tree ordinance, and we did our tree canopy resolution. At the time, we were also hiring a new urban forest manager. Marty has now been with us. He will be coming before council in May to present his management plan regarding trees. And I put this on the reconciliation list to make sure that we had the money for the pilot project so that our urban forest manager can start implementing and doing the work that we had outlined and the intent for in the tree canopy resolution. And if anyone has any questions or Councilman DeBala?
I just would like to have an interpretation of the table overall. The the right-hand side, the white, the text in the white. So the difference between the expenditure savings and listed and the goal.
So if your goal is your goal to have the
If your
current
goal
tax
is 50, is to keep the current tax rate.
then at the moment, you could still add $340,739 to the budget in expenditures.
Still make the goal.
Yes,
Okay.
it's that, if the deputy city manager wants to highlight that line, it's that line there that you, if your goal is to get to the current tax rate, pay attention to that line.
And that line, as we approve things, will be going up or down?
Down.
Down.
As we move money, as we add money to the budget, as we're spending, as we have expenditures, that will go down.
And it's when it gets,
So that's the reason why it's over $300,000 now, is that we did all the take the money out. We took all the money out first. We dealt with that first. And now, again, as I stated at the beginning of the meeting, because the city manager had just put a pot of money in the budget as a placeholder for council to consider our priorities, we took out that money at the beginning of the meeting, and now we're adding back in.
okay. I just wanted to repeat that, not just for me, but for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
If there are any residents that are listening, just to be clear on how this works. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Any questions on the tree canopy pilot?
While I have the floor, I think it's an important thing. I think it's something we said we would do last year. And I'm prepared to vote for it.
Great. Any objections to adding to the budget the $36,000 for the tree canopy pilot? Seeing no objections, we'll move that over. Councilman Tabala, keep your eyes on the 340. And now you see it's 304. Okay.
Thank you. Some of us just needed that visual.
Okay, yeah. I love this chart.
Some of us are willing to admit we needed it.
That's right. I had to like walk through it a couple of weeks ago to remind myself. Okay, next is the building benchmarking study, and Councilman Diwali, you are up.
Yeah, so another thing that we said we would do last year when we passed the climate action framework was to put action on buildings in the short-term list. It's been a year. It's been a challenging year to be doing that kind of thing, but the city sustainability manager had asked for funds to do the first step in assessing what is possible, which is to do a building energy use study. And that's what this represents, is the funds to be able to take that next step in order to figure out what does make sense in the building arena, which was our shorter term goal within the climate framework that we passed. Also want to point out that the county already has building benchmarking, which is to say building energy use measurement. Everybody reports their energy use. It's for big buildings. And you may recall, we talked about this during the climate framework discussion. Most of Tacoma Park's buildings, all but a handful, are smaller than what the county does. And so there needs to be a close look at how that would work if we went to that lower level of building in terms of reporting and measuring energy use. So that's what this is. That's what these funds are for. And they were requested by the sustainability manager as part of the program. It's I guess that's about all I have to say right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. I just want to say that I appreciate my colleague putting this forward. I think we as with some other areas in the community, we lost a little time because of the pandemic, but I think it's important that we pick up and start moving forward on some of the early steps that we identified in our climate framework. This is an example of that, and I think it's a good move forward for us. So I support it. Thank you.
Great. Councilman Searcy.
So I guess my question, the Councilmember DeBala or the Director of Public Works, if I remember correctly, the benchmarking study for some of the smaller buildings would require some of those energy tests to be done to kind of see on average how that homes are, right? Like in terms of energy efficiency. And I'm wondering about the impact of COVID. If you have more people that are staying at home right now and using more energy, do you benchmark based on the pandemic? Or do you wait until people are moving about the building more freely or moving around more freely before you do a study like this? So I'm just questioning whether or not questioning the merit. I think the merit is right. I'm just questioning the timing. Like, is this fiscal year while we're still in the pandemic the right time to do this type of study?
I don't know. I think that's a great question for the folks who set up the study. But my understanding is that the first step is not based on going in and measuring what people are doing right now. It's looking at the expenses that they've had in benchmark years, which are previous years, if you will. And that part can clearly be done now because people have already done that part themselves. That's already happened. Benchmarking at the bigger buildings doesn't, it's not a what are you doing right this minute? It's what you did over a period of time to lay the baseline. So the baseline wouldn't be this past year for the reasons you just laid out. The baseline would be back a bit. Which year exactly I would, that's why you need someone professional to do this.
I might also interject. This wasn't something that Gina was putting forward for this particular year. We're lucky to have the county moving forward on increasing their candidates for benchmarking. So what had been originally a fairly large building is now being cut in half and will incorporate, I believe we heard 17 buildings in Tacoma Park. Previously it was like 7 or something or 4. Right. So there's going to be an increase. There's some significant potential costs associated with moving forward on benchmarking, because basically once you start benchmarking, then you set a standard by which buildings need to get to in terms of reductions in energy use. And so you really need to partner a benchmarking study with funding for implementing those energy efficiency measures. So at this point in time, my understanding, and I may be wrong, but my understanding was the sustainability manager was recommending that we work closely with Montgomery County, let them take the lead on this and see where we are as they start to roll out their program. If we were to begin rolling out a benchmarking study ourselves, there'd be significant costs associated with that on a staffing perspective. So we do not have the sufficient staff in-house in order to move that forward. So we'd have to be developing a consulting relationship and a framework to create, to go beyond what the county is currently planning to do.
Okay, thank you.
Not sure, but I think we're saying the same thing, which is that the county has given us an opportunity to work on this now, to double up with them on their efforts.
Yeah, I believe, the county executive made a announcement, and I know there's work going forth this week in trying to flesh out some of the programmatic implications of that. In the forum that we had with the county and city staff, there was some significant concern on the part of our economic development manager and housing manager as to how this would move forward, and a clear understanding that funds need to be available to help programs move toward energy reduction and electrification. And so there's some serious and significant funds associated with helping them meet a goal once you benchmark.
Councilman Costick?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Braithwaite. I'm sorry, I feel more confused than I did before. So are you saying that you don't recommend the 60,000 because we should work with the county and it's going to cost us more than that? Or are you saying that you recommend we put the 60,000 in as a supplement to help us move forward on what we're doing with the county?
I wished I had realized, and I apologize, I did not realize this was on, and I would have had Gina on the call with us this evening. My understanding, and I may be totally off base, was that this was not something that she was recommending at this point in time, that her recommendation was for this year to let the county roll out the implementation, let it get into those additional buildings that will be impacted in Tacoma Park, and for us to then, take a look at how best to move it forward beyond that, but that we really were happy to let Montgomery County take the lead on this programmatically and then follow up in later years.
So that does not, I was under the very clear impression that within the $300,000 that there was money allocated, not allocated, there was climate study included in the council priorities money, and that it was for this type of effort.
I don't know.
There wasn't anything in particular. It was if there was some element. There was not a specific idea in mind.
I don't think it related to benchmarking. I think it had to do with outreach and some additional support work. Really, again, at that point, we were waiting to see where the county was going to be going with their programs. They still have quite an active effort going forward, and benchmarking is what they're rolling out first.
It's my view that there is plenty to do in our action framework on buildings to take advantage of working with the county. And I would still suggest that we allocate this amount of money to take advantage of that opportunity in the buildings arena. And rather than to try to see right this minute who said what to whom when, because I'm disappointed that we seem to have some cross purposes here.
My main concern is one of staffing and capacity with a single person office. I'm just not clear that this is something that we can oversee without additional, my understanding was that Gina had asked for additional interns as part of that funding request. And so I'm sorry, I'm ill prepared to really speak to the details on that.
I am under the impression there is one intern in her budget, in her base budget for this coming year, which may not be enough. Capacity is an issue for a lot of programs, for sure.
Yeah.
The smaller, and when you have a small program, it can be an issue. I would just really hate to see the opportunity of moving together with the county to pass us by.
Okay. Councilman Costick?
Recognizing that you might not have all this information in front of you right now, could you, Ms. Braithwaite or Ms. Ludlow, could someone give sort of a sense of what is included in the budget in terms of moving forward on the sustainability efforts in the coming year? Just in terms of how we'll be able to progress towards the goals there. I'm just trying to evaluate kind of what if there's some deficiency in what we would be able to do or not.
I can provide that for you tomorrow. Gina has developed a budget for this year with some work goals and items identified, so we can forward that to you. to provide the specifics. I'd hate to speak out of turn at this point because I might be wrong. I just texted Gina about the $60,000, and she was saying that wouldn't be enough to hire a contractor consultant to move forward on that, that it would be insufficient for that. But as I get any more updates from her, I'll let you know. But as for the budget plan, I can forward that to you in the morning.
It does include multifamily assistance and community outreach. I mean, that was, the engagement part was a huge element that they needed to focus on.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the rebate program for
And
our
the rebates.
multifamily business and residential will continue. There's been an uptick this year in that. We're, for the first year, able to spend all our business rebate money this year. So there was an interest in continuing that. And so that level of program funding is what's envisioned. Gina may be able to get on the Zoom meeting if you want to go to the next one and then come back. Maybe that would be the best course of action at this point.
Okay, we can hold that for the moment if Gina can join us. So we'll come back to that.
And Jesse, I'm sorry, is it possible to send her a Zoom invite so she's on as a panelist?
Yes, give me just a moment. I'll send it right over.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item we have, we talked about this during our priority setting in the, in the wintertime. It was the community ambassador or navigator program. And basically, as we discussed, this would create a network of residents. So we're not adding FTEs to our staff, employees, but rather working with residents in our community to help work with them, provide support, stipends, trainings, so that they can help the city assess residents' needs, connect them to services, and really just think about what programs are needed in the city and how do we best get people connected to those programs. One of the things that I discussed this with a number of the staff, and I know our deputy city manager has talked to the chief equity officer in Boulder, Colorado, that has a program like this, and a number of other cities around the country have been implementing this. And I think there could be ARPA funds available for this, but I do think it is putting the $50,000 toward it. I would like to see us get this underway as soon as possible, because the need is so great. And I think it will actually, if we can get this underway, also help us as we do get ARPA funds in to connect with residents. And also, I do think this could be something that if it goes well this year, we may want to continue into the future. So I'm asking that we put $50,000 toward the creation of a community ambassador navigator program. Councilmember Kovar.
Yes, thank you. I think this is something that a number of us had highlighted in our council priorities, and it's in the document. I think in a couple of places even that we would do this. I just had one question about it. I support the concept. I just had one question about it. I thought that I saw from the staff that they had recommended having someone in every ward doing this. And it sort of struck me that in terms of where the need was really more in 6 different wards, or should it be targeted to the areas where we really know there's a concern with public engagement. So I don't know whether that's something you've thought about at all.
I think it would be targeted, but there are areas in every ward that there is some outreach needed. So it's more special populations, and it would be in a variety of places. So I don't think it was the idea of 1 per ward.
I'm not exactly sure I heard.
I think what the city manager said is that it would be more targeted towards groups and residents in need rather than ward specific.
Okay, Well, then I may have misunderstood the earlier explanation, so thank you.
Oh, any other questions on this one? Councilman Searcy.
So I know we're not talking about the race equity. So I know we're not talking about the race equity coordination, community engagement work item, but can you talk a little bit about the distinction between those two, between the community ambassador navigator and the community engagement work component of
Right.
the race equity piece?
Yeah, so I see as other models in other cities that I've looked at is that the ambassador and the navigator program is very much about assessing people's needs, connecting them to programs, creating a better connection to services and programs in the community rather than necessarily community engagement. Like it does increase engagement, but this is about actually looking at people's needs and making sure they have the resources that they need assistance with and making sure that we have the programs to provide that assistance. And so it is, as we're doing the work on, food insecurity that we talked about in the community and really looking at how do we better coordinate that type of work to make sure we're meeting the need in the community. We know there are a lot of people who provide right now, especially under COVID, assistance in providing food. We also know that there are probably some residents who are, getting more, not that they still need the assistance, but because of maybe connections or other things and ways that we've been able to identify and work with them, they're the ones that we know need the assistance, but we also know we're missing people in the community. And so creating this type of program, that's just an example on food insecurity, but it could also extend to rental assistance if people needed it. Potentially, as we're talking about the reimagining public safety, again, mental health programs. We know even just going through with the task force and talking to our police department and Grace Wiggins in housing, how, the need is so great for mental health assistance. And it's really helping to identify people early on who may need that assistance. We're called in many times when there's a crisis that an individual or a family is facing. And again, through creating this type of program, we may be able to identify those things earlier on and connect people to the assistance they need. So I see that. And then to speak to the racial equity coordination and community engagement work, we have, made a commitment to the racial equity work in our community. We have really never put serious money towards that and what it would look like. We have done some trainings because some residents are trained in racial equity work, or we've been able to get it through the National League of Cities. But I think to move this work forward, to actually look at how we can operationalize it, we need to provide staff with the tools that they need and the capacity to do that work. I know the deputy city manager has been talking to folks in Hyattsville, and so this may mean coordinating with them to bring in some consultants to help us with this work. In addition, on the community engagement, we had Brick and Story do a number of presentations to us, talking about how we can do community engagement differently. I know yourself, Councilwoman Kostick and Councilman Dabala, have been working really hard on rethinking how we do committees, and having someone like Brick and Story come in and actually help us with a work plan and moving forward strategically in thinking about how we create committees that are reflective of our community, as well as committees that, as Councilmember Smith has said, people actually want to serve on and is of interest to them. And so that's really much more about engagement and how people are interacting with the city government. So that's the distinction. And in addition, so I think when the staff looked at the Community Ambassador Navigators program to kind of start a pilot, they estimated it'd be about $50,000, looking at what racial equity coordination and community engagement work would look like. where the $150,000 came in, that could include money to, again, coordinate efforts with Hyattsville, looking at potentially, maybe hiring someone like Brick and Story to help us on this work, in addition to additional trainings that we could do through National League of Cities or other organizations to advance our racial equity work.
Great, thank you.
Great. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for putting these items on here. For many years, Tacoma Park has taken great pride in our affordable housing and our diverse community, and especially the economically diverse community that we have. But yet we have not gone that extra step to actually provide the assistance that's needed to some of the economically challenged and for the racially underprivileged, if you will. And I'm so glad to see this in here, that we actually, taking some steps to help bring equity to the community. And so for those reasons, I support both of these suggestions. Thank you.
Great. Councilman DeBala.
Yes, thank you. I was going to speak just to the community ambassadors to say that, for example, Montgomery County during the pandemic had community ambassadors specifically around COVID, reaching out in particular buildings and neighborhoods. They were actually, if I understood it correctly, a retread of a different pilot program, which was climate ambassadors, again, targeting people who might otherwise not hear about programs, rebates, assistance that was available to them, and also providing the two-way street to get feedback from that part of the community to the government programs. So I think that Community Ambassadors program in particular has got a lot of potential, and I think we should try it. So I wanted to speak to that point in particular.
Thank you. Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I think the Community Ambassadors program has a lot of great potential, as Councilmember DeBala said just a minute ago. And I think this fits in very well with a lot of the discussions we've had recently with regard to some of the committee work, I think, and making sure that we are connecting with people across the city and doing so in a racially equitable way. And I'm really excited about what a program like this could be like. And I think it has the capacity to help build new connections and really improve all of our work, I think, across the city broadly. So I'm really excited about this, and I think it could have really great benefits that we probably don't even foresee at the moment. So I would look forward very much to adopting this program.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith.
I would first say that I do support the Community Ambassador program. I think that it's something I have spoken about, trying to get better information on what's actually happening in residents who live in the apartment buildings. I think this is a first step, but I will not support the Racial Equity Coordination Community engagement work. I don't think that is a valuable investment at this time.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So if we just take the ambassador navigators, I think I heard pretty much support for that, but if anyone opposes the $50,000 for the Community Ambassador Navigator programs, please speak up now. Okay, seeing none, then we will move that $50,000 over. Councilman DeBala.
Yes, I didn't mean to cut you off if you were going to say more about the community engagement piece.
No, I can speak. I mean, if folks want, I know we were waiting for Gina to get on, but we could move on to that piece as well. I think,
Yeah, I was assuming we were going back up a step, and that's why I have my hand up. Sorry about that.
okay. Was Gina able to get on or?
I'm here. Gina is on, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, well, sorry, Gina, you've been asked to come on tonight. I don't know, Councilman DeBala, if there's a certain question you want to ask or.
So I don't know if there's a specific question I want to ask, but now that Gina's on, I'll just repeat what I said,
It went inside, right?
perhaps in somewhat different words. That the community climate, now I've got my topics. The climate action framework envisioned that one of the first things we would do was work on buildings. And it also, the discussion involved talking about much more active community engagement to particular segments. I understand, we understand that second piece is built into the budget that you have already, that's already built into the current budget, plus an intern to help with all of that. So the question, I had suggested that we want to advance our buildings work, to take advantage of the county moving ahead at a time that I don't know about you, but I didn't expect it. And so that's great. And so I had suggested an additional $60,000 for buildings work. So I think that's what the part you didn't hear. So I guess if there's the question is to you to share your thoughts about what that next step would look like.
Yeah, so I envision with an additional 60,000, we could advance a voluntary benchmarking program to a priority segment of our building stock. So I think that would be multifamily buildings. We would need to hire a consultant or a contractor to develop and administer a voluntary benchmarking program to those buildings. And then we can utilize the data that's gathered and use that to inform a potential model for a program that would cover all buildings in the city or be offered to all buildings in the city.
And some of the discussion that took place before you got on had to do with some of the practicalities of during a pandemic that throws the energy use of buildings off. So how would the consultant frame it to take a look at that? How would I feel a little bit like we're talking about stormwater. Well, the stormwater discussion we had where the alternatives for implementation and what they might cost or what they might take in terms of resources, we don't actually even know yet. So I was about to say there was a discussion about what it would look like to implement a benchmarking, a broader benchmarking program. But now that I think about it, it's very similar in the sense that we one of the reasons to do this is because we don't know yet. But
one of the benefits of a voluntary benchmarking program is that you can benchmark previous years. And so you can gather that data from years prior to the COVID crisis. And also you're measuring against lots of different building types or buildings from across the country. And so you have data that you can normalize for extreme weather, for example, or for pandemics. So you can get a better picture of what is actually happening with those building systems. And so I don't think that the COVID crisis and pandemic will impact the effectiveness of a benchmarking program. In fact, I think it would be really helpful for buildings as they need to evaluate their energy use and manage their expenditures.
Are I can't see other people's hands, so I don't know if there are any other questions.
Yes, Councilman Searcy does, but I just wanted to make sure, Councilman Diwali, you were done.
I think I am for now.
Okay. Councilman Searcy.
Thanks. And I apologize because now I'm confused again. Thought I had my head wrapped around next steps, and now I am confused again. So can you, Gina, talk about what is happening at the county level in terms of their benchmarking work, your level of involvement or the level of support that would need to be provided for that versus what would be potentially covered by consultants, and in all practicality, you as well, because you would need to manage the consultants under this benchmarking study? Like, what would be the difference between what's happening with the county that's moving faster than everyone anticipated, and then what would be covered under this? And why does it make sense for those things to be happening simultaneously, potentially?
Yeah, so the county benchmarking law that just got, the update to that law was just introduced today and is going to be heard by county council this week. And county staff is going to come to city council at the end of May to present to our city council. So you'll get a lot of detailed information on that program. But the difference is that the county law is going to cover, the benchmarking law covers very large buildings, 50,000 square feet and above. The amendment to this law that is being proposed at the county council currently would drop that to 25,000 square feet and above. That means about 20 buildings in Tacoma Park will now be subject to benchmarking and building performance standards should county council adopt it as it's written currently. That means it's about a dozen multifamily buildings and a handful of commercial properties. And so it does impact the largest energy users in the city and the largest contributors to greenhouse gases in the city. However, it is still only 20 buildings of the city, and we have thousands of buildings that won't be covered under the county's program. And so what a voluntary program in Tacoma Park could do is assist all of the other building owners that are left behind and out of the county's programs. Since we have our own net zero goal that we need to meet separate and independent from what the county is doing, we do need to find a way to address energy use in our building stock. And since the county is not going to be doing it with these smaller scale buildings for some time, this is a way for us to help our building owners identify their sources of energy and how they can best manage it. And if we start as a voluntary program, we can gather the data needed to develop a potential building performance standard, or to just continue down the voluntary path if that is serving us well as a community.
And so for the voluntary component, is it just someone submitting their bills, or would someone need to have access to their property in order to participate?
It's essentially submitting their bills, but the contractor would need more information than just their utility bills. It also includes information on their mechanical systems, the age of the building, the square footage. So there is quite a bit of data that needs to be gathered, but it does not require anybody to do a site visit.
Okay.
Great. I had a quick, Councilman Kostick.
Thanks. I have two questions. One is about the voluntary part. Is it voluntary to participate in the benchmarking, or is it voluntary in that the changes you might make after that are voluntary?
So for the county program, that is not going to be voluntary. That's going to be mandatory. What I'm proposing for Tacoma Park is a voluntary program as we engage with our building owners in a new way. And so the building owners would be doing this voluntarily. There would be no forcing mechanism. There's no ordinance. This is just an additional offering or service that we would be offering to building owners right now.
And do you think you anticipate getting enough interest from building owners that there would be widespread participation in that?
I hope so. I hope that the consultants that we would hire would be very adept at getting engagement with the building owners. I know when we've worked with other consultants that specialize in multifamily buildings, they speak the language. So we've been able to find multifamily building owners to participate in our monitoring and optimization program. And so I'm hoping that at least we have that base level of relationship with some of these big multifamily buildings that would be willing to participate in benchmarking. And once we have some of the bigger buildings, it'll be easier to show a benefit and work with some of the other buildings too.
And in terms of who's doing the work, it sounds like you would be working directly with the consultant. What level of staff involvement is there? And is there capacity with the proposed staff that we have to handle that?
Yeah, so I would be relying on a contractor consultant team to manage the development of the program and the outreach, and then the benchmarking itself. The benchmarking itself can be done with an intern. So I anticipate that some of the work of an intern would be entering in data, which would alleviate the cost burden on the consultant or the contractor, and give the intern that we have in-house some experience with greenhouse gas accounting and data management and benchmarking for buildings. So I anticipate there needing to be some of our staff time to manage the contractors and consultants, a lot of consultant contractor time to manage the outreach and handling of the data, and then some utilization of the sustainability intern.
I lost you, Councilman Costick. Are you done?
Yeah, thank you.
Terrific. Councilmember Kovar.
Just one question. I don't know if, since you jumped on more recently, if you heard her discussion about establishing navigators and ambassadors who would be able to go out into the communities and help engage, particularly in sections of the city or in communities within the city that may not have been as involved or engaged in the past. So it sounds like getting people or helping apartment owners and apartment dwellers to understand about this type of program could be a perfect way to utilize the ambassadors and the navigators too, not so much from the technical point of view, but just to say, hey, by the way, here's a great thing you can all participate in, we'll bring in an expert to do it. So I think these things can be mutually reinforcing. So just I'm tossing that out there if it's voluntary, but we can kind of whip up some interest in it through the navigators. I think that would work really well.
I agree.
Councilmember Smith.
Ms. Matthias, forgive me if you have already mentioned this, but once you identify these energy saving improvements, who pays for it? Are we going to identify grants so that residents that live in apartment buildings can, make these purchases? And are we going to assist landlords to make the big improvements on their properties? Because, you talk to residents that love the idea of whether it's LEDs or solar that's part of their building, but that hopefully would reduce their rent costs, or if they do pay electricity separately. But it comes down to, one, if these improvements are made, do the tenants actually see them, or do they go to the bottom line of the landlord? And two, a lot of residents just don't have the money for even small ways that would reduce the cost of electricity.
Yes, so I think a very important part of the benchmarking program will be connecting both building owners and then individual homeowners and renters who want to make improvements to existing resources, and identifying the gaps for where additional systems may be needed that that existing resources don't cover. So we do have existing resources, both from our utility companies, the state of Maryland, and Montgomery County. And there are resources that we can connect people to on all levels. This includes grants for 100% cost coverage for low-income residents, to near 0% interest loans, and the Montgomery County Green Bank that's available for multifamily building owners and business owners who want to make improvements. And we can also utilize and leverage city funding for sustainability improvements that we already have in the budget, that we've worked with businesses and multifamily building owners and residents to help them along the way. And so we want to maximize all of these external resources before we utilize city resources. And that will be part of the program to make sure that we do find all of those different resources available and then utilize city resources after that.
Thank you. Appreciate your efforts.
I want to jump in just to make sure I understand. So the volunteer building benchmarking, that would be for any building. So it could be a private homeowner as well, correct?
Well, so
Or,
for $60,000, we would need to prioritize a segment and choose
Okay.
which segment, because that won't cover doing all buildings and opening it up to all buildings in the city. And so I think the priority would be given in this fiscal year, this coming fiscal year, to multifamily buildings would be where I would place the priority. And second, the priority to businesses. And then third would be opening it up to single family homes.
okay, so the first tier would be multifamily buildings that are below what we think the county is going to set. And it would be a
Correct.
voluntary program, and it wouldn't cost them anything,
Correct.
and it would be a benchmark. And the 60,000 would cover the contracting or consulting fees. And do you have an idea of how many buildings that might cover?
I don't know right now how many buildings we could benchmark for that.
Okay.
I would hope all of the multifamily buildings would be my goal.
Mhm. Okay.
Once the system is in place, I think that an intern will be able to handle some of the data input, and that would alleviate the cost pressure for the consultant and contractor.
Mhm. And if we had the consultant or contractor do this, then they would be doing all the the crunching and figuring this out. So we wouldn't actually own those programs or other things, if I'm saying this correctly. We're and so if we were to do it, if we had a contract with them and then they did the benchmarking, then they would give us, the city, the data, and the building owners the data, correct?
It would all go into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So that data would be in Portfolio Manager, which is what the county uses for its program. So we don't need to have any proprietary software or proprietary data kept somewhere.
Got it. Okay. Councilman Searcy?
Thank you. I think the mayor kind of broke down, and I'm trying to visualize what it is we're talking about. So, in my ward, Hampshire Towers is already covered through the county because they're large enough. It sounds like what the county is talking about, I guess, including are some of those lower lying, garden style apartment buildings. Is that correct? If I'm trying to picture what it is that we're talking about.
Yes, so some of the buildings would be some of the ones that are 4 or 5 stories. I think a couple of the ones that would be covered are 3 stories on Flower Avenue. That's sort of the smallest of the 25,000 square feet that would cover. And so there's, I believe, 12 or 13 multifamily buildings that are would be covered under the county benchmarking law should the county council adopt it.
Okay, so then when we're talking, so in reality, we're kind of talking more or less about 2-story multifamily.
Yes, 2 and 3 story.
And
We have a lot of those. We have a lot of those 3-story, 6 to 12 unit buildings in the city. And so we're talking a lot about those buildings.
Okay. And then would it be helpful at all to have any insights from the county on what it establishes for that lower tier that they're working on right now before we go another step down?
Yes, I do think that working with the county is imperative because they've done a lot of the groundwork and they've established a successful benchmarking program. From what I understand, they don't have any intention to lower the 25,000 square foot cap in the foreseeable future while they're implementing the building performance standards. And that timeline is, I think, about 5 years. So we would be drawing on the county's wisdom on what they've learned with implementing their programs. But I don't want to wait for the county to cover smaller buildings.
Councilman Deval, is that an old hand or?
It's a new hand. If I was gonna ask a different question, but while we're on this topic, on this topic of the program, so the program that Gina referred to, just to refresh everybody's memory from last year, Energy Star is a government created, it's an EPA created program. It's in the public domain. People, buildings all over the country use it. And while Montgomery County doesn't have plans to go right now below 50 now, they're proposing to go to 25,000 square feet. There is some limited experience across the country with going lower, if that is what Councilmember Searcy was asking about. But to get to the question that was on my mind earlier, with the community outreach discussion we were just having, and the importance that we've all come to recognize in the past year, especially the past year and before that, of the importance of reaching all of our residents in different ways. That the focus to me on multifamily buildings, not single family, makes sense actually. And I think it is best done in cooperation with the Housing and Economic Development staff, clearly, because multifamily buildings are a business and people who live in them are already, connected to the housing program. So I'm hoping, I'm just making that, furthering the point that Councilmember Kovar made about the integration with some of the other programming that we're talking about. I don't know how to put this other than to just say it. This is where we were essentially last year, that this was the next step that we were talking about doing, was looking at this kind of a voluntary energy use, building use program. And it seems to me that this is the next step in making that happen and seeing how we can reach our climate goals in our community through targeted work that isn't being done by the county, that isn't being done by anybody else, in cooperation with the county. So that's why I proposed it in the first place.
Great. Anyone else have any other questions? All right, on this one, I'm not exactly sure where everybody is. So we have the proposal for $60,000 to go into the budget as an expenditure for building benchmarking study. Thank you to our sustainability manager for jumping on and providing more information to us as we discuss this. I think on this one, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the vote to make sure that we don't miss something.
Okay. So on the benchmarking study, Councilmember Kovar,
I support the funding.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes, please.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Nay.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
No,
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right. So that's 60,000 for the building benchmarking study. All right. Let's go back to, we have 3 other items on the reconciliation list. Just to go back to the racial equity coordination, community engagement work. I spoke to this earlier, just some other things that, some numbers that the staff did put together, some of the work the deputy city manager is doing in working with Hyattsville. If we were to do some coordination with them, that might be around $60,000 to, if we have a new city manager coming on board, one of the things regarding community engagement that we could consider in the upcoming year is another resident survey, which would cost around $80,000. Again, if we're looking at contracts with places like Brick and Story to do some work, it would depend again on the scope of work, but just to remind us all that the work that they did for us this past year was about $70,000. So again, not to specify exactly what this would cover, but it would really increase the staff capacity to move forward with the racial equity work and community engagement in a number of areas.
Mayor, before we vote on this or further discuss it, would you mind just refreshing us as to where we are in terms of how close with the remaining items we are to having the tax rate end up at the current level? Is that?
Yeah, so if you look at the top there, it's $194,739.
So if this current one were approved, that would mean then another 44,000 could be added, but after that, then we'd be going, unless there were
Over the tax rate.
further cuts elsewhere, we'd be going over the
Mhm.
current rate, right? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mhm. Councilman Costick?
I'm supportive of this. I'm struggling a little bit with the exact numbers for this one and the remaining 3 items because they're all things I am interested in. I'm wondering, kind of before we pick a number specifically on some of them, if we could get a little bit into the conversations on what the others involve to sort of inform that, if that makes sense. I'd be interested, for example, in a little more information on the economic development support, especially, and what that might involve, just to kind of figure out how much I might support on this versus something else.
Great. Councilwoman Searcy, do you mind if we pause on this and we go spend a little time talking about economic development support?
sure. All right. I see the economic development manager, Samira Cook Gaines, is hanging tough. So I
am, and I'm here to answer any questions you guys may have. Just setting my camera up.
Excellent. So one of the things that I think is really important for us to keep in mind is the fact that we are continuing to make progress on the rec center development. It's important to note that the hope is that we would move forward with an RFP, fingers crossed, hopefully, sometime over the course of this fiscal year. That's technically the next step. But there's still a lot of work that will need to be done. We'll need to follow up in terms of recommendations that we receive from Brick and Story. So that's just one example of where, and this is for staffing support, basically would provide staff with the ability to engage external consultants to help with not just as it relates to the rec center development, but as it may relate to other aspects of economic development. Right now, Samira is doing a lot with very little in terms of engaging different technical assistance organizations to provide some additional support. But what she really needs is an FTE, but what we can do for the time being, because we're not ready for that discussion just yet, is talk about the opportunity for having staffing support where we can bring in consultants, for example, as we're moving forward with the rec center, if we want to bring in some consultants to help us with aspects of community engagement or putting together materials, we would have that additional support to do that. And so with that, I'll kind of be quiet and see if Samira, if there's anything else that you want to add in terms of what we may be able to do. Again, this is just for staffing support services to help them with additional outreach and technical assistance that we need to provide to businesses across the city, not just within Old Town or the CDA or the Crossroads area, but this is for across the city.
Right. Thank you, Talisha, and thank you for bringing this up. So a couple things, small business outreach, when there is one and sometimes an intern staff person, business outreach is difficult. It's not an email blast. It's not social media posts. It takes much more than just that. Those are more awareness activities, outreach really has a lot to do with forming relationships and engagement with those businesses. And oftentimes you have to show up at their door. You have to be there consistently. We do not have a street team in that way, a field team in that way. Business walks were to begin at the top of 2020. We did something similar in a few of the council members were able to kind of see that and get a better feel for that when we started handing out signs for the public health social distancing reminders. So if you can imagine, that type of work would be, in an ideal situation, monthly at least, quarterly at worst. And we're not hitting any of those measures. We have a small city and a small-ish business community. So it's not going to take a lot. I mean, if you think about the fact that we were able to hit a majority, almost every single retail establishment in the Crossroads with signs within 2 days. So it just really does take people. And I believe in that one business walk that we did, that we had about 11 people with us. So it really is all about numbers and capacity. When it's one person, it's going to take about 2 to 3 weeks to actually hit every single person. And that's, full-time days for one person, 3 weeks, just going to say, hey, how's it going to our businesses? So it does help to have some additional staff support specifically around technical things in order to free up staff for the business engagement. One major technical thing that kind of stands out to me is around grants management and grants applications. So we were able at the end of 2019 to lock down a grant for facade improvements. Due to the pandemic, here we are spending that $100,000, but $100,000 in a year, just that one grant paid for the investment of an FTE for an economic development division. So think about if we had and this is what I think some consultants are good for, when you consider the fact that they're in and out and they're not FTEs. Mm-hmm. Writing the drafts of some of these economic development grants. These are big ticket items. They're very technical and they take up a lot of time. Just the facade grant alone took, for myself, coming in, with 8 months under my belt before I started, 6 months under my belt before I started writing it, took a lot of time. So being able to pull in an economic development consultant to do that work around those grants, specifically around things like facade improvement that can be spread across the city. Our rec center is moving forward, and it would be great if we had some additional funds from the state. Those Maryland state funds are the ones that are going to help the economic development push move faster and be more inclusive, because we'll be able to do all the work, not pieces of the work where you kind of lose your community over time because you've been, piecemealing things for so many years. So that grant applications and kind of ushering and stewarding those major grants is important, and a consultant can do that. The other piece is kind of a developer's showcase. So Takoma Park is a fantastic place with very particular needs, wants, and desires. We have, through the community recreation, community engagement process, been able to kind of get some ideas of what we want around that site. But now we have to communicate what we want, who we are. There's a lot of assumptions around what Takoma Park may want or who others may think we are. But when we have real data and we have real focused goals, that's when we can actually talk to development partners in a way that can be much more beneficial for the process. So I would love to kind of further development expositions or development showcases about who we are, what locations are available, connecting with private property owners who are interested in selling but can't find the right developers. All of those things also happen within an economic development division that I'm just not able to do. I'm currently working with the Purple Line grant program, and they have a technical assistant consultant, and I'm working with a firm there specifically around the rec center because it's along that Purple Line. So I'm able to get our rec center, get our community engagement results into that level of development showcases. So we're talking to people about what we want, not people who just have an idea of what they see as potential in Takoma Park. And
if I can, I know I want to just kind of focus this a little bit. Councilmember Searcy, the funds that you were proposing were for some kind of staff assistance that's not a FTE.
Correct. It's a staffing, sorry, I'm using day lingo. Staff support contracting services is basically a way that you have funds available if you need to outsource for specific staffing purposes. So grant
and this right, and this would be for something that would not be ARPA related.
Correct. And I think that there is, I grow increasingly nervous when we're talking about the ARPA funds around development, because I do question whether or not the ARPA funds in terms of business support is really more COVID impact direct kind of to the business kind of issues is what will likely fly. Some of the things that we did under COVID, I'm not exactly sure if we needed contracting support for like grant writing purposes, that would be something that would be applicable under ARPA.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That is correct.
Yeah. All right.
Business engagement is probably what's going to fall under there first, and also grant programs, direct grant assistance, which also needs some staff capacity, but those will probably easily fall under ARPA, whereas things like broader economic development activities like development showcases to identify partners and to go after bigger state funds through the grant programs, that's probably not going to be covered by ARPA.
Mm-hmm.
And the last piece, I'm sorry, was going to be the community connections. That was the community connections that have already been established through the rec department. I am going to need some assistance to kind of maintain that, even if it's creating a framework for us to move forward on. And I know that everyone talked about the community ambassador navigators. And what I'll say is it would be really great if they could walk into a framework for that work as opposed to, staff creating it with the information we have. It'll take a while.
Right. So I see that falling under the community engagement work versus, I mean, there may be some overlap here, but I do think there's a piece of that so I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, I know we have, people are trying to keep the tax rate at the same level where the different pots of money need to be allocated on that. Because the last couple of pieces you said, Ms. Cook Gaines, in my head, I was putting under the community engagement work.
I agree. It can go under community engagement work. And what I'll also remind the council is that economic development actually helps lower the tax rate, because the stronger our economic development is, the more tax money coming in, the more spread our tax burden is between our residents and our businesses. So I did want to just kind of remind you that it serves more than one priority and goal.
Councilmember Siemens.
Yes, just following up on Ms. Cook's last comment, I think it does affect the tax rate, but not this year. It affects it in out years. But back, it's getting late at night, and I'd like to blame that for my not understanding, but exactly how much more money can we add to the budget out of these three items that remain and still keep the tax rate where it is now? Is it the $70,000? Is that the
No, we're at about 200,000.
Okay.
$194,739.
All right.
So
if we add those up, we need to chop how much money? Again,
so if the deputy city manager wants to, yeah.
Yeah, so you have 275,000 on the board here.
About 80,000 over.
Yeah.
okay, so we have to take 80,000 out of that at the minimum to keep the tax rate at the same as it was last year. All right. That makes it easier to make a decision. Thank you. I personally advocate that we do exactly that, and then that is to find $80,000 out of those last three items that we can take off the board.
So I would say that given the potential overlap between community engagement and that work and the economic development, I would propose, instead of 150 for that, 125. So take out that, but I do think we do need.
You confused me there. You took the money off of the racial equity, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
And put it down to 125. Because I do think we are going to be able to use some ARPA funds for the economic development and other things. So, and I see some overlap there. So I don't know if my colleagues on the other two categories have, but I would be, if we wanted to take down that work, the community engagement work, and able to support some of the economic development.
Since I haven't muted myself again, I'll say that I support the economic development work. I think that's incredibly important for the city.
Councilman Devala.
Yeah, thank you. I like the idea, if we can make it work, of supporting all three of the things that are that are left at a reduced rate. It's not having heard about library services, there may be a point at which you go below and it's just not worth it because you can't get what you need. But I like that idea. I'm struggling a little bit on that, particularly on the economic development part, with the Economic Development Program has done great work. There, no question about it. There's at some point a staff capacity question there in terms of managing all the different pieces. And I like the use of interns rather than consultants to do as much of the work as possible. I'm thinking of a fair amount of what you just described might very well be addressed under ARPA. And so I'm just not seeing the whole thing. That's how I'm feeling about it. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of really good ideas in there, and maybe it would be better to focus on a couple of them and not try to add on too many things at once. I like the ones that integrate with some of the other priorities that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
I will say that the interns are difficult because they don't know anything. They only know what they read or heard or experienced in their academic setting. Consultants have a high level of capability very quickly. They don't take half the year to ramp up. You can get sharp interns, of course, and we've had one before. However, I would never put a state grant in the hands of an intern.
Yeah, Samara took the words out of my mouth. It's
Yeah.
not in any way to slight our interns. I guess the bigger question in, for folks on council is, we've talked about our level of commitment to priorities. And this is another question of our level of commitment to our priorities. Are we committed to investing resources, to acquire resources, to make the necessary facade improvements that we need along New Hampshire Avenue, or to make other types of economic development improvements that we need in this community? If we are, then $50,000 is gonna pay us back 5 times over, right? We're gonna get that money back if we're investing in the necessary, applying for the necessary state funds, the necessary dollars. But if not, then we keep doing what we're doing, which is limited. So I think this is a case where investing in the infrastructure, investing in additional staff support that actually seeks out some of those other resources that are available, we just don't have the capacity to do, to me makes sense. And again, we've seen it work with the $100,000 that we got already from the state. So we've seen how you can invest in a person or invest in some staffing support and see the returns almost immediately in terms of the cost that we put in. Now, I understand that the goal is to try to get us down to the tax rate, and I'm willing to kind of move around a little bit in order to figure out how to do that. I would like to hear about the library services idea first.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say, why don't we actually ask Councilmember Smith to talk about what the 50,000 would cover, so that might help inform this conversation.
Well, I don't recall coming up with the $50,000 number, but library services, the same ideas that I had proposed when the council was looking at goals for the year. I think most of these ideas will be paid for with ARPA funds, but there probably will be required some city funding to either get these ideas off the ground, or some of the parts of the contracts that are not covered by ARPA funds. So I'm not wedded to the $50,000. I didn't come up with that number.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to throw a proposal out there. I'm completely open, and again, because I see some overlaps between these 3 categories. So if we had 125 for the community engagement / equity work, 50 on economic development, and 20 on library. Again, I do see like overlap there. that would get us pretty much at the current tax rate. I think we're about $250 over, but somebody could fix the numbers on the staff side. So that I'm just going to throw that proposal out there.
We could
but-
also not go to 4 digits, by the way.
Right. We could also not go to 4 digits. But I don't know if the deputy city manager wants to just make a note below or put it in there as a potential, and then people could see the numbers. 125 on community engagement, 50 on economic development. And again, I think those two overlap. So if we wanted to move some down, that would be fine with me too. And I just put 20 for library services, thinking about what Councilmember Smith said, that a lot of this is going to be covered under ARPA funds, but maybe we could use 20,000 to get some contracts moving or other things that in the short term as we're waiting for ARPA funds. And you see that then we're still about 261, but as this, I figure the finance department could figure out that $261.
Okay,
Councilmember
can I call the
Kovar.
question?
Councilmember Kovar had a comment. You're muted.
Thank you, and sorry about that. I agree with the way you're structuring this. The numbers could vary a little bit. I would just say a couple of things. One, I had suggested, and maybe we still have time to get to this tonight, that in addition to all of the work that we just talked about now, there's the ARPA funding, and we talked about the potential of including in a couple of whereas clauses, certain things that we had priorities for in the use of ARPA. Once we find out the details, as Councilmember Duvall said, that could be very soon. And what we could do on these three, because it seems as if all three of them would have at least components that would likely be fundable through ARPA. We could, if we're going to do those whereas clauses, actually cite these three as examples of things that we hope to spend ARPA funds on. And if we're off by a little bit, and I would like to keep the tax rate the same, as far as I'm concerned, that could come skimmed out of the stormwater piece, just so we can get there. So
Great.
propose that.
And I'm not sure the ARPA funds would cover the racial equity and the community engagement stuff. It may cover the ambassador, but
Well, portions, I think portions of each, though, certainly when it comes to economic development, if we're targeting our work to small businesses that have suffered as a result of COVID, I think absolutely. And the same argument could be made for members of the community who haven't been able to take advantage of services like the library because they couldn't travel or visit or have the funds to get there. So I see at least components of them all in there. So to the extent that these numbers are lower than maybe their sponsors had wanted, at least there's the possibility for ARPA boosting it later. And so that's all I'm saying.
all right. Councilmember Siemens called the question. Any other comment or any Councilman Caustic?
Yeah, I think this proposal generally makes sense. I mean, I think all of these are important things, and I'd love to see ARPA, add to and or replace some of those funds that we have, especially for the economic development and library, where I think there might be more opportunity to do so. And I particularly, I'm excited that we're putting some funds towards each of these things. We talked a little bit about each of them, maybe a little less so about the library. So I just wanted to add that I think putting some more funds towards some innovative library services that can really do some more outreach to the community during the time of the library's closed, to me makes a lot of sense. I think it's been great that we have been able to have community members check out books and do things despite the library being closed, but it is really difficult in the structure that it's set up with the way that this technology works. We don't have an Amazon-like service to be able to order those things, and we don't have capacity to pick them up in different locations and to the extent that we would like. And I think that's something that makes a lot of sense to have in here. And I appreciate all the information, the economic development, and that also I think is really important. So this proposal, I mean, I'm flexible on numbers to make sure that we're providing enough to each of them, but this seems to make sense to me.
Anyone else? All right, any opposition to moving forward with this proposal? All right, then I think we'll put this in the books. And again, I think the direction from council is that we want the tax rate to be the same as last year, but obviously we don't have to carry it out to 4 decimals, but I think the finance department can make all the numbers work. So
Yes, we have to go through and do the adjustments, and so that'll come back to you, but we'll keep the tax rate the same.
yeah, so there may be. Okay, I do think there were some things that people wanted to talk about on that were not in the general fund that don't necessarily impact the tax rate, but were items that I think there were 2 items, the atrium that folks had raised as potentially putting that on a hold as we analyze ARPA funds and other things to look at how that might be funded, not just in the next year, but out years for that. And I think the last time we talked about it, the city manager had acknowledged that this would probably, given capacity, not be something that came up right away in the fiscal year anyway. So that was one. And then I think there were, the street sweeper was another item that, given we needed some more information, and we understand there's a lot of information to gather, that we were going to have Ms. Braithwaite come back to us to discuss the different options on that, and what to do in that when more information was available regarding the EV versus hybrid and other things. But Councilmember Kovar, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I did favor us finding a way to, I don't know exactly how to put the brakes on the atrium project. And it did seem as if maybe one way to address that would be in the accompanying resolution or whereas clause that we have. My concern had been primarily that it sounded as if, while the 200,000, whether we went forward with it or not in the current year, wouldn't change the operating budget in a way that would have an effect on the tax rate. Then the potential is next year, we're talking about something like 600,000 that would be directly on budget. And the way things work, it's harder once there's some initial sunk costs. I think we all understand that, to then argue against it. So I think it's ultimately a good project. It's one that we should do, but I'm also thinking about, with the library going forward, there's going to be quite a bit of turmoil in that general area and in that structure, and appreciating the benefit that it would have for the police staff and for the general movement within the building. I just would feel better not irredeemably committing us to it in this budget. So if we can find a way to say we're going to pause it or wait and see, or hold off making a permanent decision on it, I'd appreciate that.
Great. Councilman Devala.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to speak to the street sweeper and whether or not it made sense to put the street sweeper on the hold list, or whether it made sense to put another piece of equipment on the hold list, so that if we buy the sweeper at the full amount of money, which is an extraordinary expense but might make sense, but is way more than had been planned for out of the equipment reserve for this year, that we signal that we're considering delaying the purchase of another piece of equipment instead. I realize we could have that conversation at the time that the street sweeper bill comes to us, but since we've already spent so much time talking about it, if everybody if most people feel that way, then maybe we should put that in the resolution.
If I might, the street sweeper has to be replaced soon.
Right.
So it's a
Right.
choice
I
of-
didn't mean to say don't buy a sweet scraper. That's not what
Yeah, no, I just wanted to be really clear that that's something that does have to move quickly. It's more a choice about what is chosen. For the atrium project, I would like to have a decision tonight if you want to keep that in the FY22 budget in the facilities maintenance reserve, so that as we're preparing our budget schedules for the ordinance, we can have that kind of decided, and it could come back when we find out more information from ARPA. And
Yeah, I think that's what
Or
we,
move it.
I haven't had, well, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I have not heard anyone wanting to take it out of the budget, but to put it on hold to understand whether or not ARPA funds could be potentially used. But I think there's a concern if we can't use ARPA funds, really thinking about spending not necessarily the $200,000 this year, but the $600,000 in the out year, and what that means. So that's my sense from council, is that we want the project to be done, but we want to also think about how we're funding that project. And it sounds like there may be a good chance we can use ARPA funds. Should be awesome. But
I think that's fine. I would like to have the direction this evening.
yeah. All right. Anybody oppose what I just said or have a different take on the atrium? Nope.
Can you say it again? I'm not sure.
That we're-
I apologize.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. That the $200,000 for the atrium that is budgeted this year is stays in the budget, but that council wants to review what may be covered under ARPA funds to do that work. And that in particular, we want to look at and what needs to be funded, not just this year, but next year, because it would be $600,000. And we don't have enough in the facilities maintenance reserve to cover that. And so before just going ahead, spending the $200,000, we want to see if ARPA funds can cover some of that and then make that decision, so that we're not in a place next year where it's like, we need to take $600,000 out of the general funds to pay for it,
I'm good with that.
or we make that decision consciously.
I'm good with that approach. Yes.
Cool. All right, so that street sweeper, we're good on. Councilman Costick, you had something else and I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, the camera trailer that's in the CIP for the police. I'd like to put that on the hold list as we figure out more about, sort of our approach and get some recommendations, Councilmember Siemens, to act on and make a decision on at a council level, not taking their recommendations verbatim, as you pointed out. I see some potential for the camera trailer to be valuable in the sense that it might replace officers responding or spending time in a particular area, for example. But I also think there's potentially a flip side in terms of the risk of increased surveillance and potential for kind of what it means to have a camera in some different locations. So I think there are just some questions about that. And I think we should make that purchase after we have some more of a sense of our direction on rethinking public safety, and would like to make that decision a little farther down the line. I think the camera trailer was also in the budget for this year, as I recall, and hasn't been purchased. So it doesn't seem like it's an item that is a critical need immediately either. So I'm proposing we just put that, I think it's 33,000, on hold while we take next steps.
I have a question. I don't know if we can answer this tonight. Is if we don't get the trailer, does that mean we can't use one of the speed cameras? I guess I'm trying to figure out what purpose the trailer has, because the speed cameras have actually helped to decrease speeding and accidents, particularly on New Hampshire Avenue over the years. So I guess I'm
Not to interrupt, but I
Yeah,
know
yeah, no,
because
go ahead,
I've
'cause I'm-
asked several times about I know it was on the budget last year because whenever it's been on the budget, I've been like, what's this camera trailer thing?
Yeah.
So there actually is a description in the budget that says it's not related to speed cameras. It is 33,000, but from speed camera funds is where the connection there is for a mobile camera trailer, which it said could be used for crime suppression and identification of subjects in targeted areas, specifically in areas of high number of thefts from auto, can be used during festivals and other special events, and has capacity to zoom in on suspicious activity.
And we don't have this now?
I'll defer to staff on that, but I don't believe we have anything like that right now.
We don't, no, it's actually newer and more sophisticated technology that allows you to, that actually makes it kind of less intrusive as a piece of activity, but I'm not the best person to speak to it, I'm sorry. And I know the chief has described it to me and I'm blanking out on it at this hour, I'm sorry. I'll have to get back to you on the assets about that. It does allow for some greater potentially objectivity in certain situations as opposed to relying on police officers.
Right. Okay. Well, it sounds like that might be one that, I mean, it would come back to us anyway because of before a purchase order or something. So maybe we just put that on the list to come back to council with more specific information anyway. That would be a good one. Thank you, Councilman Costa. Anything else from a fund or anything? Councilmember Kovar?
Just a process question.
Mhm.
So I mentioned this previously. We've talked a lot tonight about items that we're funding now, or maybe not, but they could be funded in ARPA. And like I mentioned, I think it would be helpful if in the whereas clauses or whatever we have leading up to the actual budget that we list some of the potential priorities that we have for ARPA funding. I don't think we have to say, here's how we're going to spend all $13 million that's left after what we've already allocated in the budget. I think that's a good idea to have two whereas clauses and say among the things we want to spend money on or something to that effect are these things. I don't want to decide that tonight and go into that, but if people agree that we should do that, maybe I'm the only one, how and when would we be able to figure that out? I'd be fine if the staff drafted something with a few of the things we've talked about, and then we had an opportunity on the 12th to just add a few or take away a few, but that's just.
I think the deputy city manager has already done that. If I feel like
we do have that, but we also do want to, and that certainly can be a basis of a section of the ordinance. But it really requires a lot of discussion with council in the future about how to go forward to it. So it's not, it will take a much more, it's probably going to be several council meetings talking about it.
I didn't mean to say we would do a comprehensive, voluminous list in 2 weeks, but just we've talked about some things tonight that we envision covering within that, and it just seems like it might be important to say that in the same document. That doesn't mean we have to say we're going to use it for eviction and food insecurity and all these other things that we probably will, but just the things we talked about, at least here. So
I think the deputy city manager, in one of the questions you answered for council in one of the budget documents, one of the many budget documents you've sent us over the last 72 hours, I think you had like 3 or 4 categories and said, these are the buckets that staff is already considering for ARPA funds. And I believe Councilmember Kovar that might be the same thing you're talking about. And we
okay, I remember there were 5 buckets. I'll take a look at that. Yeah, okay.
I don't know, maybe, take a look at that, or we could circulate that language and see if that's close to what you were thinking of.
Okay.
So. Councilman Costick.
I just wanted to flag that I do want to propose some whereas or resolved clauses going into the resolution, specifically on how we are planning to continue our work on reimagining public safety. And so I hope, we don't need to discuss that today, but I hope to bring that to the council to consider as part of the resolution, just to make it clear that we are doing that work, even though our budget may not directly reflect that. I think that is important in terms of the work that we're doing and identifying that. So just wanted to flag that.
Okay. Anything else? Councilmember DeBala?
Yeah, I just want to thank all the staff that worked on this the last few weeks and helped us through this process. That's it. Thank you all. I noticed that most of you are still with us. That's why I wanted to make a point tonight.
Great.
On behalf of all of us, thanks.
Terrific. All right, well, I'm going to call it. So thank you, everyone. And again, I just want to thank all of the staff, but particularly our finance department, Tracy, our head of HR, because I am now more keenly aware of the need to, do some of these IT things we've been talking about. I knew it before, but she needs the assistance there. And I just want to thank her very much for doing that work. And to our deputy city manager. Thank you very much. And to the entire council for all your work on this. And to our city manager, your last reconciliation. And we're done before midnight. That's not bad. I think last year we went well into the morning hours. So I just want to thank everyone, thank the residents for their input. And I really, I know we're all tired, but I'm very excited about the work that we've done with this budget and some of the things that we'll be able to continue to do based on the priorities we've set as a council. So thank you, everyone, for your hard work. And we'll be back again on Wednesday night.
And I still have a chance to go till midnight.
No. All right.
Thank you.